32-year-old bachelor Jason Witt appeared to have it all.
I had just finished up my MBA. I had just landed a job with a very good IT consulting firm and was doing really well. I was traveling almost every other week.
But by the summer of 2005, Jason realized one thing was missing: love.
I had come to this realization that I had probably dated a few girls in my past that I could have made a wonderful life with. My own level of commitment didn't allow that relationship to move forward.
He would talk about, what can I do better? How can he make himself a good match for someone?
As Jason plunged back into the dating scene, he was determined to get it right. That August, he joined an online dating site and quickly came across the profile of an attractive 24-year-old medical technician named Andrea Stanley.
Just shot her a quick note just to say, hi, how are you? I'm Jason. And got a response pretty quick.
The conversations that followed revealed clear chemistry.
Andrea had a very engaging writing style. She made me laugh from the get-go. We had an easy time bantering back and forth, so it was enjoyable just talking to her, even though I hadn't heard her voice.
Despite Jason's initial excitement, he did have one concern.
I had never dated someone with a child. Knowing that she had a daughter, I had some questions. I didn't know what that meant in terms of any custody issues.
But Jason didn't have to worry about the father at all. On their first in-person date a few weeks later, Andrea opened up about her past.
There was an ease to our conversation that was really nice and refreshing. So I asked her, where's the father? And her response to me was, I was raped.
He's in jail and he's not a part of her life.
When I heard her say that then, it came out so strong, like such a survivor. It was really impressive.
As the date wrapped up, Jason knew one thing was certain.
There's no doubt it was a great date, and I definitely wanted to see her again.
As 2005 came to a close, their relationship continued to blossom.
We were just kind of taking the natural steps that you'd expect in any serious relationship.
We couldn't be happier.
Me too.
They got along well. She shared his sense of humor. They enjoyed each other's company. That did give me the feeling that they were right for each other.
Then one night in February 2006, Andrea delivered some unexpected news.
There was an uncomfortable silence, and she simply said, I have something to say. She seemed scared to tell me, and she said,
I'm pregnant.
I was obviously surprised, and I didn't want to make any decisions quickly.
It'll be fine.
But soon it became clear that Andrea wanted answers.
After probably a week and a half, she started asking me questions.
What's up, Jason? It's been 2 weeks.
I said, I am committed to you. I love you. We will have this baby together. Let's see how you and I do, and then we can make decisions that will impact this child long-term.
Just one step at a time.
Her response was, either we're getting married or we're not. Getting married when she was showing was not an option. Here was that moment to say yes or no. The decision came down to yes, I'm in love with her, so I want to marry her.
Jason knew in his heart he was making the right decision. But before Jason could even pop the question, he would be thrown into a vortex of lies, deceit, and manipulation that would destroy everything he believed in.
He was just caught in this whirlwind of emotion.
I can't imagine how someone can keep such a deep, dark secret.
I didn't know what to do, and that's what just scared the dickens out of me.
In April 2006, Jason Witt couldn't be happier to be in love with Andrea Stanley, the future mother of his first child. But that joy was soon shattered when Jason received a distressing call from Andrea while on the road.
She was distraught, she was upset, and she's just, I don't know what's going on.
I lost the baby.
It was devastating, and that just made me worried for her.
Still, Jason knew what he wanted to do for the woman he loved.
I knew I still felt the way I did about her. I still loved her. I created a get-well bag. At the bottom was a diamond ring she says she had always hoped for.
It's my ring.
Will you marry me?
It was kind of a neat moment to recommit to the two of us.
With the ring on her finger, Andrea quickly bounced back and set a whirlwind date for 2 months later. But by the day of their nuptials, it seemed Andrea had morphed into a classic bridezilla.
She was texting me all kinds of things. She was going to leave me at the altar, and I was a horrible person, and I just didn't know what to do. I felt that she had been under a tremendous amount of stress. She was coming off losing a baby, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt.
I tried to just be positive for Jason and, look forward to a beautiful wedding that day. And fingers crossed that Andrea was actually going to show up.
In the end, Andrea did show up, and the wedding went off without a hitch. But over the next few months, it seemed to Jason that Andrea had a flair for the dramatic.
We had some ups and downs, which I felt was normal. What made me a little bit nervous was one fight in particular. She was just off the roof, angry, and within minutes, turned around like nothing had just happened. It was a real Jekyll and Hyde moment.
Then one night in January 2007, Andrea reached a new low.
Why didn't you respond to my text messages?
I had no idea what was going on. So I started questioning her, why are we always fighting? Where is this coming from? And Andrea started describing her depression.
Jason, I just want to die.
What?
I was concerned that she was suffering, having lost a child. I wanted to get her help.
I just want to kill myself.
Jason felt even worse after Andrea revealed that the anniversary of her rape was fast approaching.
We'll get you someone to talk to.
It's too late.
But a few weeks later, Andrea's spirits were lifted.
We find out we were gonna have another baby, and we started seeing a doctor, and we knew she was not gonna lose the baby. So it really did change the relationship. We were both ecstatic.
Jason was excited to be a father. I could definitely tell that this was something that he always wanted.
By the time she gave birth to their son that November, it seemed Jason and Andrea were finally hitting their stride.
We were both ecstatic. The first time holding my son, it just brought tears to my eyes.
But unfortunately, the upswing didn't last long.
I told you never to do anything like that.
One night, Andrea got upset at a comment that was made by her daughter.
I didn't do anything!
She was in the kitchen, and I just hear a crash.
Go to your room!
Andrea!
I run over, and then there's just broken glass all over the tile floor. She just had a fit of rage, and she just scared the heck out of me. So I said to her,
Give me our son! Give me our son!
Mom!
It's okay, sweetie. You'll be fine. Give me our son!
she would not hand me the baby.
With no other choice, Jason called the police, which caused Andrea to pack both kids in the car and take off.
At that point, I had no idea what she was capable of.
It was just the tip of the iceberg.
On May 2nd, 2008, Jason Witt called the police after his wife Andrea flew into a terrifying rage and took off with the kids.
I was scared because I had no idea what she was capable of. The cops picked her up a couple miles into the next county.
But Andrea told police she'd merely been taking the children to dinner.
She had kind of charmed herself out of any sort of consequences. I was beginning to learn at this point that she could lie fairly easily, readily, and people were going to believe her. I began to question the reality of the stories that she told me early on in our marriage. And I'd begun to wonder whether or not she had really been raped.
And by December 2008, Jason was even more certain that his instinct was right.
We had an argument, and Andrea had gone home to her parents, and her mom called me. And so my question to her mom was,
Did she ever get any help after her rape?
her mom's response was, huh? And I said, she was not raped, was she? And her mom's response was, you need to speak to Andrea.
When Andrea finally returned home later that night, Jason did just that.
We need to talk.
She said to me, I was married.
I didn't want you to find out.
She told me that he did rape her, but she told me that he was the son of a prominent person in town. Her parents pressured her into marrying him anyway.
Jason didn't believe a word she said.
The dam broke because everything I believed about this woman was a lie.
But despite it all, Jason wanted to somehow save the marriage. He believed that counseling was the best next step.
I was shocked. I was very vocal with Jason in telling him that she was not going to change. But Jason was committed to the relationship.
Things were good for at least a couple weeks, and she got pregnant again. I was happy, but Andrea could never follow through with counseling. So that was when I realized that I don't have a partner in this. This isn't a marriage if there's only one person fighting for it.
With that, Jason felt there was only one thing to do.
Leaving a pregnant woman was not an easy decision for me at all.
On September 4th, 2009, after 3 years of marriage, Jason filed for divorce. He hoped the worst was behind him, but he was wrong.
The day I filed for divorce was the day I basically set off a nuclear bomb.
After giving birth to a second son, Andrea fought tooth and nail to keep their children from Jason. For over 2 years, a custody battle of epic proportions played out between the two of them.
Jason and Andrea were basically sharing custody. She initiated 6 false allegations of child abuse against him, with Child Protective Services alleging all manner of child abuse. She initiated 2 or 3 police investigations against him as well.
Every month I was dealing with a new accusation. I was dealing with accusations just left and right. This was just a harrowing experience, because when you're dealing with children, all she had to do was cry wolf, and the courts were going to believe her.
But when all allegations against Jason were proven false, a judge finally held Andrea in contempt and ordered her to allow visitation immediately.
I knew that Andrea was backed into a corner. For the first time, someone of authority had let her know that there were truly consequences to all this stuff that she was doing.
Over the next several weeks, Jason was surprised to hear very little from his ex.
There were no accusations. It was just quiet. And it felt good. It was her weekend to have the kids. So I dropped off the kids with Andrea, and I met some friends, and we went out and watched the Super Bowl. After getting home, I just went straight to my bedroom, and I just crashed.
But around 4 a.m., something stirred him from his sleep.
I remember hearing a shuffle right next to my bed, and I felt a crack right against my head. I can't see, it's dark, I don't know what's going on, and a big pop went off. And at that moment, I knew whoever it was had a gun.
And what he saw next would send his world spiraling out of control.
I was letting out whatever sound I could, and it was just a shriek.
In the early morning hours of February 6th, 2012, Jason Witt found himself under attack.
I knew whoever it was had a gun, so I flipped the light on.
Andrea!
And Andrea is standing there, staring me down. My head was racing. I'm just wired at this point, adrenaline just running like crazy.
Turn over.
Andrea grabbed my hands and started to tie them up with plexi ties, and then began to pull the bed sheets off the bed and wrap them around me.
Andrea! No! You're gonna kill me!
I'm not gonna kill you, Jason. I love you. Stop struggling.
I couldn't breathe, and I could feel the plexi cuffs just loosening just that little bit. Eventually, I just pulled my arms out of the plexi cuffs, put a hole through the saran wrap. I started going after her, and the gun goes off. She was trying to shove her way into the room, so I started hitting her over the head with the gun. I shut the door and I locked it and called 911. I told them my ex-wife broke in. She tried to kill me. I need help. I don't know if she's still in the house. I don't know what's going on, but I need help. I need an ambulance and I need police here quick.
As police arrived, Andrea was nowhere to be found, and Jason was rushed to the emergency room. He had no clue until he arrived at the hospital that he'd been shot point blank in the face.
The bullet went through my cheek, under my ear, and out my neck, and didn't hit anything major. It's an absolute miracle.
Meanwhile, police located Andrea at a different hospital almost 4 hours away.
She told sheriff's deputies that she had been a victim of domestic violence, that her husband had beaten her with a gun.
She made claims that it was not her fault and that she was defending herself. Even after committing this horrible attack and then getting arrested at the hospital, Andrea was still lying.
It was shocking to me that she thought anyone would believe it.
Fortunately, all of Andrea's previous actions against Jason spoke volumes.
She was placed under arrest for aggravated assault for causing serious bodily injury with a deadly weapon.
Only a sick person can do this kind of thing. To walk in and torture him. God knows what her plan was. I mean, it's got to be the utmost evil.
On May 14th, 2013, Andrea went to trial, claiming she was a victim of domestic violence. But prosecutors were confident with the trail Andrea herself had left behind.
One of Andrea's boyfriends testified about the things that she had done with him that were very, very similar to what Jason had gone through. There was also evidence from a psychiatrist that she was a habitual liar. There was clear proof that Andrea had a disturbing pattern of terrorizing the men in her life.
I think Andrea is a very miserable, sad, sick individual. And it's just sad that her demons really ran so deep, she couldn't overcome them.
After 2 days of testimony, Andrea Stanley was convicted on all counts and was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
There was just a huge sense of relief. It just felt like 8 years of absolute hell was finally over.
Today, Jason continues to question everything he ever knew about Andrea.
I keep wondering how all this happened. I mean, there isn't a single word that she ever told me that I can truly rely on as honest truth.
And when he thinks about committing to a relationship, Jason keeps his focus on the people who matter most.
Jason has really stepped up. He is a full-time single dad. I think this has really turned him into a stronger person for the long run.
The boys and I are catching up on what we missed out on. And it's been just unbelievable to watch the kids grow, to have them come out of this situation, especially my oldest. That little kid is my hero. I can't look back on the last couple years of the time I've spent with my boys without anything but complete joy.
After being adopted as a baby, Rachel Shubin felt like she had always been searching for her place in the world.
I always knew I was adopted, so it wasn't shattering, but it wasn't a good childhood. They moved a lot, my adopted family, so I was always the new kid. I felt like I didn't belong.
Rachel dreamed of settling down and having a family of her own someday.
She always wanted a stable family, something that she didn't have when she was growing up.
And in the winter of 1994, while on break from college, a chance meeting in California was about to put 18-year-old Rachel's dream in motion.
I came up to West Sacramento, my hometown, to visit my adopted family. And I went and picked up my mother coffee from the grocery store.
At the cash register, Sergio Alvarez packed up her purchases, and Rachel couldn't help but recognize him from her high school class.
Sergio's very, very popular, got along really well with everyone. He was even homecoming king.
Rachel was floored when Sergio followed her out to her car and asked for her number.
So I was super flattered. This good-looking man asked me to go out with him.
A few days later, the two went out for dinner. And afterward, Rachel felt herself being swept off her feet.
We went back to his house, and he played the keyboard for me. Told me he couldn't breathe without me. It was so sweet and romantic.
She found him to be very endearing and big and attractive, and it didn't take them long to fall in love.
Sergio had this giant family. I liked that he had these roots. It was the family that I'd always wanted.
The only thing that seemed off was the way Sergio shied away from intimacy.
Sergio wasn't as affectionate as I thought was normal. I just thought that was his DNA. Everyone's different.
Despite Sergio's lack of affection, Rachel knew she had met the man of her dreams. A few months after they started dating, Rachel dropped out of school and moved in with Sergio in Sacramento.
I felt like maybe because I had had such a rocky childhood that God gave me Sergio. He made Sergio for me.
With marriage in mind, Rachel got a job managing a local gift shop, and the young couple began saving money for their future. But after 2 years, they hit a speed bump when Sergio lost his job at the grocery store for constantly showing up late.
He had started getting write-ups and warnings. And so after 3, they fired him.
It wasn't my fault.
You're right.
But Sergio quickly landed on his feet when one of his friends hooked him up with a job on a ranch for troubled teens.
They needed guidance counselors, men that live there, and give them the rules and to get them used to structure, discipline. He loved that job.
The only problem was that the ranch was in Nevada, 7 hours away.
But he was gone 8 days and home 6 days. And when he's at work, he's not available. I've never minded being alone, but it was hard to be in a relationship with someone far away a lot.
With Sergio gone so much, Rachel became close to a woman who worked nearby named Kate.
She helped Kate out when Kate was working. She would watch Kate's children.
Rachel was eager for Sergio to meet her new friend. So on one of his weeks at home, Rachel invited Kate over for the evening. But later that night, Sergio made a disturbing confession to Rachel.
Your friend Kate came out.
Sergio tells Rachel that Kate came on to him and tried to kiss him.
She'd made a pass at him, and he had said that she called me a bitch and said,
"Why are you making her?
So I felt super betrayed.
I just can't believe Evan's right.
But when Rachel confronted her friend, she heard a very different version of the story.
According to Kate, it was the other way around. Sergio tried to unbutton her blouse and tried to go even further.
He came on to me.
Rachel wasn't sure who to believe.
My friends said, you know, she's crazy, she just wants him.
I would have thought, no way, she probably came on to him. Sergio was just an all-around good person.
No.
I ended up believing Sergio.
No.
But Rachel would soon find out that Sergio was far from the knight in shining armor he pretended to be.
Underneath it all, he was evil.
He was psychologically off.
He threw away a good life to be a monster.
I knew it.
In their 4 years together, Rachel Shubin and Sergio Alvarez had faced their share of challenges. Then, in the fall of 1998, Sergio came home from his job on a ranch in Nevada with more bad news.
What's going on? What happened?
Lost my job.
He said that a boy had made an allegation that he was too rough in one of the restraining moves that they were allowed to make on kids when they became out of hand.
Rachel, it was not my fault, all right?
Sergio was let go, and Rachel decided to just be glad he was home.
I was so relieved that he wasn't going to be gone all the time.
Luckily, someone in Sergio's large network of friends quickly helped him land a new job delivering baked goods in the neighborhood.
He's coming home at 3 p.m. every day. The job was perfect for that time in our life. I couldn't have been happier.
In the fall of 1999, almost 5 years after they started dating, Sergio and Rachel finally wed. Within a year, the newlyweds welcomed a baby girl, and 2 years later, Rachel was pregnant again with a little boy. Sergio had given Rachel the family she'd always dreamed of.
They seemed very happy. Sergio seemed like a great father. He was always protective, always present.
But when no one was looking, that Sergio vanished.
But he was not attentive. He wasn't responsible. That attitude, it was very hard for me with the kids. They needed a responsible father.
In 2004, Rachel learned she was expecting baby number 3. Although Sergio was rarely around to help out at home, she was happy that he was at least supporting them financially. Until one day that fall, when Sergio told Rachel that his supervisor at the delivery company was unhappy with his performance.
He's being warned. He didn't take it seriously, so they suspended him. And then after careful review, decided not to bring him back.
How many times is this gonna happen?
All Rachel could think about was how they were going to get by. But Sergio had a plan.
Sergio came up with the idea of going into the police academy. He thought he could make a difference in the community. It was something he really wanted to do.
In 2007, Sergio officially became a member of the West Sacramento Police Department. He immediately put in for night patrol.
He liked working the graveyard shift. He liked catching the bad guys.
But working nights didn't ensure that Sergio spent his days with his family.
I started to notice that he was absent a lot more.
Sergio often claimed he was being called in to testify on his cases. And the extra hours were beginning to take their toll.
Rachel, what is this?
He became mean all the time. He'd bait me into arguments. I can't do anything right. It was just impossible to please him.
Rachel felt instinctually that something was off, and one night in March 2010, she discovered why.
A woman messaged me, and I didn't know who this lady was.
The woman claimed that Sergio had been deceiving Rachel, and this time, there was a shocking set of facts that not even Sergio could deny.
I'm devastated because it's true. This is real.
Look me in the eye, Sergio. Is it true?
In 2010, Rachel Alvarez received a shocking message from a woman she'd never met.
Even though I didn't know her, she said that she couldn't stand that I was being subjected to so much behind my back. She had to do the right thing. She said that Sergio was having an affair.
The woman said that Sergio had been romantically involved with one of her friends for over a year.
She had dates and times and situations that she wouldn't know unless what she was telling me were in fact true.
When Rachel confronted Sergio, he reluctantly admitted to the affair.
You're sorry.
My heart was broken.
It's been going on for a year?
He was very remorseful, said he loved only me. I'm devastated because it's true, this is real.
It'll never happen again.
Rachel struggled with what she should do, eventually deciding to put her family first and believe her husband.
That was her family structure, and that was so very important to her. So she wanted to try to make it work with him.
I wanted to give him the chance. I was willing to work past it. I loved him very much.
So over the next few months, Rachel did her best to put the past behind her and focus on her family.
He did seem to try. So I thought it was on the right track.
But by 2011, after 17 years together, it seemed to get more and more difficult to keep Sergio content, especially in the bedroom.
It seemed for him to get physical satisfaction, he had to be very aggressive. I thought he had like a guilty complex because of the affair. And so this is what it would take for him to be satisfied.
Sergio, you're pregnant.
Rachel justified that as being, this is what my husband needs from me. This is what a wife does for her husband. I said, that doesn't seem normal, doesn't seem right to me.
Rachel did her best to please her husband until September 2012, when Sergio came home with some devastating news.
He opens up his wallet, and there's this groove where your badge goes. And I'm like, where's your badge? And he said, they put me on paid admin leave. A girl made an allegation.
They're accusing me of things that had nothing to do.
Sergio said that a woman he'd encountered on patrol had accused him of forcing himself on her.
Some to the effect that if she didn't grope him, that he would cite her or give her a ticket. He said the Police Officer Association protects their officers from allegations like this because they are normal in this line of work. Why would he force someone to do something? It's very out there.
Rachel was relieved by Sergio's explanation and hoped the incident would be resolved soon. Until Sergio was unexpectedly called into the station.
I'm thinking, oh, is he in trouble? Then my doorbell rings.
Yes.
There were 6 or 7 patrol units in front of my house. I was in shock.
What is going on?
Rachel may have thought her marriage had hit rock bottom, but the real nightmare was only just beginning.
You think you know someone, but you really don't.
He would put that uniform on, and he got carried away with the power.
I think he just snapped.
In September 2012, Rachel Alvarez was horrified as an army of investigators descended on her home.
They had a search warrant with specified items that a judge had signed and given them permission to obtain. I was so terrified.
What's going on?
They took all of their cell phones, their computers, tablets, anything that had any kind of communication technology.
When Sergio returned, he told Rachel the allegations were more serious than he originally thought.
What's going on? What now?
They've taken DNA from him. I did not know what to think. This is all new, scary territory for me.
And after 2 months with no word from investigators, Sergio finally sat Rachel down and showed her something shocking.
It was a link to sex addiction in police officers. He told me I'm a sex addict.
I could be in a lot of trouble.
Sergio admitted he'd had many affairs during their marriage.
There's been a lot of them.
He also told her that the current police investigation hanging over his head was serious.
Please don't leave me.
Rachel was torn.
I loved him. I have a sense of loyalty to him. I don't want to be his wife, but I don't want to turn my back on him either.
Rachel reluctantly agreed to stand by him. And later that night, she tried to learn everything she could about Sergio's addiction.
In doing research to sex addiction, there are links to sexual predators' behavior. And that's when I read My Husband in Black and White.
Something clicked in her head. Looking back, she could see the different traits.
With every word, Rachel's eyes were open to the reality she'd been living in, and she thought back to Sergio's lack of intimacy and aggressiveness in bed.
But I also began to remember the allegations from early in our relationship from Kate.
He came on to me.
And thought there might actually be substance to it. So I started thinking he really was a sexual predator. That's the moment I started fearing him. I knew I needed to get out.
Over the next few months, Rachel quietly formulated a plan. And on January 3rd, 2013, she told Sergio she was taking the children out for the day. But instead, she packed up the car and fled to Florida.
She had to be scared to take her kids, drive all the way across the country. Only fear can drive a woman to do that.
And Rachel escaped not a moment too soon. 2 months later, Sergio was indicted on 35 counts, including aggravated kidnapping, rape, sexual penetration, and oral copulation by use of authority and duress.
A woman came forward and said that she had been picked up by him and felt threatened to the point that she felt she needed to perform sexual favors in exchange for not going to jail.
Eventually, investigators linked him to 5 more victims.
The charges were more than I could wrap my mind around. I was physically ill for 2 weeks.
At his trial in February 2014, Sergio pleaded not guilty, claiming the women's stories couldn't be trusted. But the prosecution argued that Sergio was a sexual predator who used his badge to hunt his victims.
He would check the system for active warrants and pick names of women that he felt he could victimize. He'd take them in his car to some remote locations, wooded lots, back alleys, and they would have sex.
Do me this favor, you won't go to jail.
With DNA and victim testimony, there was no denying the truth.
The physical evidence was overwhelming, and I was just in shock.
After 2 weeks of testimony and 9 days of deliberations, Sergio Alvarez was found guilty of 25 felony counts of rape, oral copulation by duress, and aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to 205 years in prison.
Sergio put that uniform on, and he got carried away with the power that he had and used it against these women.
You can't prepare yourself for the father of your children and the man you give 18 years of your life to be a monster. I think there was something always wrong with Sergio. I think he just snapped.
Today, Rachel's focus is on her children.
Sergio was like a firestorm that destroyed the home I built for my children and the roots that I'd always wanted for them. It's always going to be hard, but my children ground me.
It's a tough road, but she's still standing and she's not going down, and she's going to be there for her children.
Rachel is now content to have stepped out of Sergio's shadow and into her own future.
I don't feel sorry for myself. I'm not ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of him. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a survivor.
The desert remembers everything, even when people try to forget. That is the first truth investigators whispered when the case resurfaced, an old wound suddenly torn open by a discovery no one expected. It began with a question, sharp as broken glass cutting through 24 years of silence: how does a person vanish on a clear summer night in a town where everyone knows everyone, and no one sees a thing? The question echoed again the moment the arrest was announced, a headline flashing across screens: Nevada 2001 cold case solved, breakthrough arrest shocks community. The shock wasn't because they found someone. It was because of who they found. The story drags us back to July 15, 2001, to a town that looked peaceful from a distance but pulsed with a quiet tension locals never admitted. Cobalt Ridge, population just under 4,000, sat alone between two mountain ranges, a place so small that strangers were spotted instantly yet large enough for secrets to grow roots. That night, the heat refused to break, the air pressed thick against the skin, and the only relief came from the glow of streetlights trembling in the desert wind. At 9:47 p.m., a call hit the dispatcher's board. A young woman reported missing, last seen walking home from her shift at the Silver Echo Diner. Her name was Mara Ellison, 22 years old, college student, known for her quiet voice and long dark hair that locals said always seemed to move even when she stood still. Officers first treated it as a misunderstanding, a late-night duty, a forgotten message, a young woman blowing off steam after a long day. But then they saw the look on her mother's face, a look that said something ancient and instinctive had already shattered. Within minutes, headlights cut through the dark as patrol cars spread across the town's grid, their radios buzzing with clipped updates. The first place they checked was the stretch of lonely asphalt known as Ridgeway Road, the shortcut Mara always took to get home. A road that held more shadows than street lamps, more silence than answers. The diner staff insisted they watched Mara leave safely. A truck driver claimed he saw a figure walking alone. A neighbor insisted she heard a scream, though she couldn't swear if it was real or imagined. Every account contradicted the other, and every detail pulled the search in a new direction. When officers found Mara's bag lying in the dirt 2 blocks from her house, unzipped, untouched, eerily clean, they knew they weren't looking at a simple disappearance. They were staring into a void. By midnight, volunteers joined the search. Flashlights skimmed the ground like trembling stars fallen to earth. Dogs barked into the dark, their handlers straining to hold them back from something unseen. Helicopter blades churned above the desert like a restless heartbeat, sending dust spiraling over the rooftops. Still, no trace of Mara. It was as if the night swallowed her whole. Reports later described the atmosphere of that first week as electrified, fear crackling through the community like static, clinging to every whispered conversation. Parents gripped their children tighter. The diner closed early each night. Residents locked their doors for the first time in years. Rumors mutated with speed, fueled by anxiety and the growing certainty that someone among them knew more than they were saying. Some believed Mara ran away. Others whispered about an outsider camping near the old quarry. A few murmured Mara had been stalked, though no one could name by whom. Detectives pressed harder. They reconstructed her last known movements minute by minute. They traced phone calls, interviewed co-workers, examined every inch of Ridgeway Road. But every clue they uncovered dissolved under scrutiny, like footprints disappearing in shifting sand. No struggle marks. No blood. No witnesses with consistent statements. The case gained the dreaded moniker that chilled investigators, cold within days. Her family refused to let the town forget. Flyers stapled to wooden poles bleached under the desert sun. Candlelight vigils flickered in the park, casting fragile hope against the darkness. Her father walked Ridgeway Road every night for months, whispering her name into the wind until even the wind seemed to carry it away. Then came the discovery, a detail so small, so fragile, it almost escaped notice. In late August, nearly 6 weeks after Mara vanished, a hiker exploring a ravine north of town found a single silver pendant tangled in a bush. Engraved on it was a crescent moon and the initials M.E. Mara's mother confirmed it belonged to her daughter. Investigators swept the area, combing through rocks and gullies, their search expanding into a massive grid. Yet beyond that pendant, there was nothing. The desert offered only silence. The case tightened around a collection of near clues, a pendant, a scream, a witness who wasn't sure he'd seen anything at all. Detectives interviewed every known acquaintance, including Mara's on-again, off-again boyfriend Lucas Grant, who insisted he was home that night, asleep. His alibi held. They questioned a trucker passing through town, who told the same story every time but always avoided eye contact. They interviewed a drifter apprehended days later, though nothing tied him to Mara. Without evidence, every lead died. Autumn came. The desert cooled. The town moved on, or pretended to. But the Ellison family never did. Each year, July returned like a wound reopening, newspapers printed anniversary articles, and the case sank further into myth. The girl who vanished into the Nevada night, headlines repeated, year after year. Investigators retired, transferred, or left the force entirely. Boxes of evidence gathered dust in a storage room. Yet the unease never faded. Residents claimed to see shadows near the ravine, stray lights in the desert, shapes moving along Ridgeway Road long after midnight. Some dismissed them as tricks of heat or imagination. Others believed the case was still alive, waiting for the right moment to speak. Then, 2 decades later, a new task force revived the investigation. Technology had evolved. Old evidence, once dismissed as useless, was re-examined. Tiny fibers, nearly invisible, were analyzed using updated techniques. Soil samples from the ravine were tested with improved extraction methods. And the pendant, the fragile sliver of hope recovered from the bush, revealed something investigators had missed. Lodged beneath the clasp was a microscopic trace of material, degraded but intact enough to build a profile. Not DNA, but polymer residue, matching a rare industrial coating used in a specific manufacturing facility located 50 miles outside Cobalt Ridge. A facility that only a handful of local residents ever had access to. That discovery became the first true spark of movement in 24 years. Investigators began cross-referencing employment records, visitor logs, and distribution manifests. They looked into every individual connected to the facility in 2001. They expected a list of dozens. Instead, there were only 9 names. 9 people who, at least on paper, could have come into contact with the coating found on Mara's pendant. And among those 9, one name surfaced again and again, appearing in early interviews, listed as a volunteer during the first week of searching, and living just 3 streets away from Mara's family home. A name investigators had overlooked for years because he had never seemed important. Never seemed suspicious. Never seemed anything more than a quiet, unremarkable man blending into the fabric of the town. His name would later ignite a firestorm when the arrest warrant was issued. His face would appear on every news broadcast, framed by the headline that shook the community, "Cold Case Solved, Breakthrough Arrest Shocks Nevada Town." A face people recognized but could not reconcile with the act he was now accused of. Before that headline erupted, before the world learned his name, investigators spent months reconstructing the timeline from scratch. They revisited old witnesses, who now remembered details they once buried. A waitress recalled seeing a man lingering outside the diner that night. A neighbor remembered a truck parked near the ravine long before dawn. A retired officer admitted he always believed someone familiar to Mara was involved, though he could never prove it. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to tighten. The desert no longer felt silent. It felt like it was finally beginning to speak. And in the center of that awakening stood the most unexpected suspect the town had ever seen, someone who lived among them, celebrated holidays with them, attended vigils for the girl he may have known would never return. Someone who had walked freely for 24 years. Someone whose arrest would shatter whatever innocence Cobalt Ridge had left. The first crack in his mask appeared not through a confession, not through a slip of the tongue, but through a routine digital sweep, something investigators now perform without even thinking, a far cry from the technology available in 2001. The revived task force analyzed decades of archived phone data, traffic camera footage, land records, and public logs, connecting threads no one realized existed. And in that web of resurrected evidence, one path kept looping back to him. Not directly. Not boldly. But faintly, like fingerprints dusted onto glass that only reveal themselves under the right light. His name, spoken softly at first by detectives reviewing the case, spread like wildfire through the task force room: Caleb Rowan. 46 years old now. 22 years older than he was the night Mara disappeared. In 2001, he worked nights at a local parts manufacturer, a facility that used the exact industrial polymer found on Mara's pendant. He quit abruptly 3 months after the disappearance. No one questioned it at the time, people left jobs. But combined with the new analysis, the coincidence felt wrong. It felt intentional. Investigators pulled his old interview transcript. A single page. 3 minutes long. He'd told officers he joined the search but never saw anything unusual. His voice was described as calm, cooperative, unremarkable. Nothing about that interview stood out. That, detectives said, was precisely the problem. In a case filled with noise, contradictions, rumors, false leads, the man who said nothing at all became the most suspicious. The decision to surveil him in the present day came quietly. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just unmarked cars rotating shifts, agents observing patterns, movements, habits. Caleb lived alone in a single-story beige house on the edge of Cobalt Ridge, the kind of house no one glances at twice. His yard was meticulously maintained. His truck spotless. His daily routine predictable: work, groceries, home. The kind of ordinary that makes people invisible. But investigators know, invisibility is sometimes the most deliberate disguise. They searched public archives next. Court records. Employment files. Tax documents. Nothing alarming. No criminal history. Not even a parking ticket. But absence of wrongdoing, in cases like these, can be its own kind of red flag, an existence so clean it feels curated. Then came the first meaningful disruption. A neighbor reported that, shortly after the cold case was reopened, she saw Caleb standing in his backyard at 2 a.m., staring into the desert. No movement. No cigarette. Just standing. Minutes passing, unmoving. When she asked if he was okay, he didn't answer. He only stepped back inside, shutting the door quietly. The neighbor didn't think much of it until she heard about the investigation. Then she called. Detectives added it to their growing file. The town itself seemed to vibrate with old fear as rumors of a person of interest resurfaced. The older generation remembered the original panic, the locked doors, the restless nights, the searches that stretched into the early morning hours. Younger residents, who were children or not yet born when Mara vanished, felt the unease through their parents' hushed conversations. Something was shifting. Something buried was rising again. Meanwhile, investigators dug into Caleb's past, not the documented past, but the one hidden between lines. Former co-workers were interviewed. Many remembered him vaguely, quiet, punctual, kept to himself. One recalled something more unsettling. She remembered that Caleb often left work early in the summer of 2001, usually claiming illness, and once returned to his station with dust on his shoes even though his job kept him indoors. At the time, no one cared. Now, that detail throbbed like a warning. Detectives followed every thread. They reviewed dispatch logs from July 15, 2001. A single call from a landline registered to a residence 3 blocks from Ridgeway Road had been dismissed decades ago. The caller hung up before speaking, so it was labeled accidental. But with new tools, they traced the origin, their house belonged to a retired couple. In 2001, they rented a room to a young man needing temporary housing. His name, Caleb Rowan. Investigators felt the temperature shift in the room as the pieces aligned. Now they needed one thing: proof. They filed for a warrant to covertly collect environmental samples, dust from Caleb's truck, fibers from his work equipment, soil from his yard, even particles from the underside of his boots. It took days to gather enough. Weeks for the lab to process. During that time, detectives watched him walk through the grocery store aisles with a calm, blank expression, watched him pump gas with steady hands, watched him drive the same route home every night. To the untrained eye, nothing looked unusual. But to investigators, every step felt heavy with implication. The results came back on a Friday morning, delivered in a sealed envelope. Inside were pages of data, but investigators didn't need numbers to tell them the truth. The opening sentence said everything: polymer residue consistent with the pendant sample found on tools owned by the subject. The match wasn't perfect, time had eroded the elements, but it was strong enough to establish correlation. Strong enough to move the case forward. Even so, correlation wasn't evidence of guilt. Detectives needed more. Something irrefutable. Something that connected Caleb not just to the polymer, but to Mara herself. They found it by tracing a detail so small it seemed insignificant. Among Caleb's old employment files was a record of an industrial job completed on July 14, 2001, one day before Mara vanished. The task required employees to load heavy materials into company trucks. Only 2 workers were assigned to that specific job. One was Caleb. The other signed off early that night. Meaning Caleb had access to a company vehicle during the exact window Mara disappeared. That discovery hit investigators with the force of a blunt weapon. Suddenly the case no longer hinged on coincidence. It pointed directly at opportunity. They pulled vehicle logs next. Most records were intact, except one: the truck Caleb used on July 15 was inexplicably missing mileage data for that night. Not erased, just absent. The type of omission that wasn't noticed in 2001 but screamed sabotage in 2025. Detectives pressed harder, this time into the physical truck itself. It had long since been decommissioned, sitting in a junkyard 2 towns over, but parts of it remained salvageable. They secured permission to analyze the remnants. Beneath what remained of the bedliner, in a crevice shielded from weathering, they found a single microscopic particle, organic, degraded, almost meaningless. Until the lab reconstructed it. Human epithelial tissue. Partial. Damaged. Completely unusable for DNA. But female. And found exactly where a struggling body might have brushed against metal. Investigators didn't call the particle evidence. They called it gravity. The force pulling every fact toward one man. Still, they weren't ready to move. They needed one final piece, something capable of anchoring the arrest in court. And it arrived unexpectedly, through a source no one predicted. A former volunteer from the 2001 search effort reached out. She remembered something that had haunted her for years. On the second night of searching, she said she saw Caleb walking alone toward the ravine area, flashlight off, shoulders taut. She called out to him, but he didn't respond. She assumed he was overwhelmed, everyone was breaking down by then. But when she saw him turn quickly and walk away from the search grid, she felt a chill. She told no one back then. People were exhausted, hysterical, imagining shadows everywhere. She didn't want to add to the chaos. But now, 24 years later, she was certain of what she saw. Investigators logged her statement. The timeline tightened like a noose. The breakthrough came not from science or witness testimony, but from a moment that lasted less than 5 seconds. A surveillance team watched Caleb exit his house late one night, carrying a small, dust-covered box. He walked to his truck. Opened the tailgate. Placed the box inside. But before he could close it, he froze. His head lifted slightly. His posture shifted. His breathing sharpened. Agents later said he looked like a man listening to ghosts. He stood there for a full minute, gripping the tailgate. Then he abruptly removed the box, turned, and carried it back inside. But that hesitation, those 5 seconds, told investigators everything. He wasn't disposing of trash. He was trying to dispose of memory. A judge approved a full search warrant the next morning. Agents stormed the house without warning. No one expected resistance, but what they found was more chilling. Caleb stood in the center of his living room as if waiting for them, hands at his sides, expression calm. Not angry. Not confused. Calm. As though the past had finally landed exactly where he always knew it would. While officers restrained him, others swept their house. In a storage closet behind the water heater, hidden beneath layers of old carpeting, they found the dust-covered box. Inside were objects sealed in airtight bags, gloves, a fragment of rope, a cracked flashlight, and, most damning, a torn piece of fabric matching the shirt Mara wore the night she vanished. Time had faded the color, but not enough to hide the truth. The room turned silent. Investigators knew instantly, this was no coincidence. This was no forgotten box of junk. These were relics of a night the town had never stopped fearing. When Caleb was escorted outside, reporters were already gathering, lenses pointed like weapons. But he didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Didn't even blink under the blinding lights. He simply stared ahead, eyes fixed on the desert horizon, eyes that seemed to understand he was walking out of one world and into another. A world where the truth was finally closing in. The moment the dust-covered box emerged from the closet, the investigation shifted from suspicion to inevitability. Officers held their breath as the items were catalogued under the harsh white beam of evidence lamps, each object a silent fragment of a night that had haunted Cobalt Ridge for 2 decades. The cracked flashlight, the rope fibers curled like dried roots, the gloves stiff with age, the torn shirt fragment that matched the description of what Mara Ellison wore on July 15, 2001. Objects that should never have been in Caleb Rowan's possession. Objects frozen in time like artifacts of a buried crime. But even with everything laid out on the table, investigators couldn't shake the sensation that they were standing at the threshold of something darker. Something unfinished. The room smelled of dust and damp insulation, but beneath it lingered a faint metallic note that turned the air heavy, fear, dread, the weight of truth pressing down on the walls until even silence felt loud. Caleb sat handcuffed near the doorway, guarded by 2 officers. His face revealed nothing. No panic. No remorse. No attempt at denial. Just a stillness that unsettled everyone present, like he had already accepted the ending long before the investigation caught up to him. As detectives carried out the last of the items, he lifted his head slightly, eyes following the box, just for a second. A small, flickering human reaction in an otherwise impenetrable expression. It was enough to confirm one thing: he knew exactly what they'd found. He was transported to the Cobalt Ridge precinct, a place unchanged in its bones since 2001. The same beige walls. The same flickering exit sign. The same interrogation rooms that had once held desperate witnesses and grieving parents. Now, for the first time, the room held the man they believed responsible for the disappearance that defined the town's darkest chapter. Agents placed Caleb in the chair, clipped the cuffs to the metal ring drilled into the table, and began the meticulous process of preparing the interrogation. Recorders on. Evidence sealed. Team assembled. The air hummed with the gravity of the moment. For 24 years, this seat had remained empty, reserved, it seemed, for the person now occupying it. Detective Aria Stanton, lead investigator of the revived task force, entered the room with a folder thick enough to crack the table if dropped. She took her seat, folding her hands deliberately, making sure Caleb saw the weight of the case stacked in front of him. He didn't blink. His breathing remained steady, as if he were merely waiting for a bus rather than facing the unraveling of his life. "Caleb," she said, her voice level, unhurried, "we need to talk about what happened on July 15, 2001. He stared at her with an expression that hovered between indifference and amusement. A faint smile twitched at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it came. "You found a box," he said calmly. "That doesn't mean anything." Detective Stanton leaned forward, elbows on the table. It means everything. His eyes flicked to the mirror. He knew there were people behind it. Observing. Waiting. Listening for the first crack. But Caleb didn't crack. Not yet. The interrogation stretched for hours. Detective Stanton pressed him about the truck, the missing mileage, the polymer traces, the eyewitness from the search party, the box of concealed items. With each question, Caleb offered the same response: silence, or a faint shake of his head. He never raised his voice, never asked for a lawyer, never demanded proof. It was as if he had rehearsed this moment for years and now simply followed the script. What unnerved investigators most wasn't guilt they understood. It was certainty. He behaved like a man assured of his own untouchable position, as if he believed no matter how many pieces they uncovered, they still lacked the one thing that mattered: a body. And without that, he seemed convinced they would never finish the case. But the world had changed since 2001. A missing body no longer guaranteed freedom. Technology, forensic science, behavioral analysis, everything had evolved, and Caleb's calmness now felt like arrogance misplaced in a new era. Outside the interrogation room, the town braced for impact. Word of Caleb's arrest spread faster than investigators could contain it. Rumors spun like dust devils, some claiming the police had the wrong man, others convinced they had finally caught the predator who walked among them for years. Groups gathered outside the precinct holding candles, photographs of Mara, and signs demanding answers. Reporters set up camp along the sidewalk, microphones pointed at anyone willing to speak. Helicopters hovered overhead, their shadows sweeping across the ground like reminders of the chaos settling over Cobalt Ridge once more. Meanwhile, detectives raided the second location tied to Caleb, a storage unit he had rented under a different name. The unit sat on the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing and buzzing sodium lights. The lock was cut, the door rolled open, and inside they found rows of plastic crates stacked neatly like a grim archive. Most held mundane objects, tools, old electronics, camping gear. But one crate stood out, marked only with a red X. Inside were maps of the ravine area, printed in varying scales. Satellite images annotated with markings. Newspaper clippings about Mara's disappearance. And a notebook filled with cryptic entries, dates, times, coordinates. A chilling pattern emerged: he had continued returning to the ravine area for years after the disappearance. Watching. Tracking. Revisiting ghosts. This discovery changed the tone of the investigation entirely. No longer was this simply a case of evidence hidden in a closet. This was obsession. This was ritual. This was a man reliving the night over and over, refusing to let it fade into the desert sands. But still, no confession. Detective Stanton knew the psychological pressure had to come from within the room. She re-entered the interrogation space and placed the notebook gently on the table. Caleb stared at it, and for the first time, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Ownership. A memory that tightened his jaw. "You went back," she said quietly. "Again and again." "Why?" He didn't answer. She slid the map forward, tapping the circled coordinates. "These points match the areas our search teams never reached in 2001. You knew where to look because you knew where not to look." Still silence. Detective Stanton leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "We know this wasn't random. And we know Mara didn't vanish into the dark by accident. Someone led her off Ridgeway Road. Someone who knew the back paths." The seconds stretched, heavy as lead. Finally, Caleb looked up. "You're searching in the wrong direction," he said softly. The room froze. Detective Stanton narrowed her eyes. "What direction should we be searching?" He didn't answer. But the smirk forming on his lips was enough to send a pulse of dread through the observation team. Caleb had given them something, small, indirect, maddeningly vague, but something. A breadcrumb that suggested they had not yet unraveled the full truth. If he didn't deny involvement, if he didn't claim innocence, if he didn't attempt to clear his name, then what was he protecting? Investigators expanded the search radius. They brought in cadaver dogs, drones, ground-penetrating radar. Dozens of officers fanned out across the ravine and surrounding canyons. The sun blistered overhead, the earth cracked beneath their boots, and dust curled into the air like whispers rising from ancient bones. Hours turned to days. Days bled into a week. Still nothing. But then, on the 8th day, a breakthrough. A drone operator spotted an anomaly, a depression in the soil that didn't match the surrounding terrain. Officers trekked to the site, a remote outcrop hidden behind a wall of brush. The ground felt soft underfoot, disturbed, unnatural. They began to dig. 2 feet down, they hit a layer of compacted debris. 3 feet down, fragments of fabric. 4 feet down, bone. Not enough to identify immediately. But enough to know the search was no longer for a missing woman. It had become a recovery mission. When the news hit the precinct, Caleb's demeanor shifted. Subtly. A twitch in the jawline. A narrowing of the eyes. A long, controlled exhale. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. But investigators realized something chilling: the remains were incomplete. Scattered. Some pieces fractured, others missing entirely. Which meant the site they found was not the only site. And that meant Caleb wasn't just withholding the truth. He was controlling it. Detective Stanton returned to the interrogation room, dust still clinging to her boots, fragments of desert still clinging to her clothes. She placed the preliminary report on the table. "We found her," she said. Caleb tilted his head, as though listening to a sound only he could hear. "No," he replied quietly. "You found where she stopped being seen." Detective Stanton felt the air compress around her. "Then where did she go next?" He closed his eyes, a slow, deliberate motion. "She never left," he whispered. A riddle. An answer. A taunt. The investigation had cracked open, but the truth was still buried deeper, buried where only the man in front of her could lead them. And he seemed determined to make them work for every inch of it. The excavation site grew into a small city of floodlights and yellow tape, a pulsing hive of investigators fighting against the desert's determination to conceal the past. The wind clawed at equipment, scattering dust like it was trying to erase the truth faster than they could reveal it. But the truth pushed back. Bit by bit. Bone by bone. Fragment by fragment. Each discovery tightened the circle around Caleb Rowan, yet each discovery also deepened the question he left hanging in the interrogation room: she never left. A phrase sharp enough to slice through the confidence of even the most seasoned detectives. As forensic teams carefully lifted the fragile remains from the ground, Detective Aria Stanton stood at the edge of the ravine, staring at the disturbed earth. She felt the weight of the moment settle across her shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't closure. Not yet. This was only the beginning of a darker descent. The remains recovered didn't form a complete skeleton. Portions were missing, sections that should have been there, bones that had no reason to vanish unless someone wanted them gone. The desert didn't scatter bones by accident. People did. Back at the medical examiner's lab, the fragments were cleaned, catalogued, reconstructed with delicate precision. Under magnification, patterns emerged, marks on bone surfaces that suggested controlled force, deliberate breaks, and damage inconsistent with natural decomposition. It was the kind of detail that made investigators inhale sharply and step back, as though distance could soften the horror etched into the remains. But distance did nothing. The truth was right there, staring at them from the stainless steel table. While the forensic teams worked, the pressure surrounding the precinct grew unbearable. News vans multiplied like insects. Journalists shouted questions at officers entering and leaving. Candlelight vigils were held every night in the town square, their glow trembling in the wind like fragile hope struggling to stay alive. The Ellison family, once resigned to decades of silence, re-emerged into the public eye with grief sharpened by the possibility of an answer, grief that felt almost dangerous in its intensity. The town teetered on the edge of panic and catharsis, unsure which direction it would fall. Inside the precinct, Caleb sat alone in the interrogation room, still handcuffed to the table, his expression unchanged. Hours passed, yet he neither requested food nor water. He stared forward as if watching a screen only he could see. To the officers observing from behind the one-way glass, his stillness felt predatory. A man waiting for his moment, waiting for the investigators to reach the next piece he had left behind, not to help them, but to watch them struggle. Detective Stanton returned to the room, a new folder under her arm. She sat across from him, elbows on the table, gaze sharp as a blade. "We found part of her remains," she said. Caleb blinked slowly. "Part. You knew they would be incomplete." He didn't answer. Detective Stanton leaned closer, lowering her voice so the words felt heavier. "You said she never left. What does that mean?" Caleb's eyes drifted toward the wall, as if following some invisible thread across the room. His fingers flexed against the metal cuff, not out of discomfort, but calculation. "You're digging in the wrong direction," he said again, voice barely audible. Detective Stanton's breath hitched. "Then tell me the right direction." But Caleb only smiled, a small, sharp smile that felt like a secret weapon. "You'll find it," he whispered. "You already started." It was enough to send the task force scrambling. Investigators expanded the search area into a grid stretching a mile in every direction from the original site. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical vultures. Ground-penetrating radar scanned soil layers untouched for centuries. Dogs combed ridges and slopes, barking into the wind with frantic urgency. Every officer felt the pressure tightening. Caleb was leading them somewhere, whether intentionally or reluctantly, and they needed to decipher his riddle before the desert buried the next clue in silence. On the third day of searching, a cadaver dog alerted near an outcropping of sandstone. Officers marked the location, began digging cautiously, and soon uncovered another small section of disturbed ground. Beneath 6 inches of compacted soil, they found a second fragment of bone. Then a third. Then, scattered deeper, dozens more, each piece hinting at a larger truth. Something was wrong. The fragments didn't belong together. Different decomposition patterns. Different soil conditions. Some bleached by sun exposure, others protected underground. As though they had been moved. Rearranged. Hidden at different times. Detective Stanton stared at the growing collection of remains and felt a cold realization crawl up her spine. "This isn't a single burial site," she whispered. "This is a map." A map only one person understood. The forensic pathologist confirmed her suspicion that same night. The remains appeared staged. Placed deliberately across multiple locations, separated by distance and time. Someone had returned again and again, shifting pieces, moving fragments, scattering evidence across the ravine like a puzzle meant to be unsolved. A puzzle Caleb had kept to himself for 24 years. Detective Stanton returned to the interrogation room once more, skin tight with exhaustion, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. She dropped photographs of the second site on the table. Caleb glanced at them, then met her gaze with a look that made the room feel colder. "You visited those sites," she said. "We know you did." Caleb tilted his head. "Do you?" She slid the notebook they found in his storage unit across the table. "Your coordinates tell us everything." He studied the cover for a long moment. His eyes softened, not with remorse, but with recognition. Ownership. Pride. Detective Stanton's voice sharpened. "Why move her remains? Why scatter them?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, the metal chain clinking softly against the table. Finally, he spoke. "Because you weren't meant to find her." The simplicity of the statement struck deeper than any confession. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't defensive. It was matter-of-fact, a truth he carried with ease. Detective Stanton's chest tightened. "Then why speak now? Why point us toward anything?" Caleb lowered his gaze to his hands, fingers still bound by cold steel. When he spoke, his voice trembled with something that made Detective Stanton's stomach twist, not fear, not guilt, but anticipation. "Because you already did," he said. And now I want to see how far you're willing to go. The tone changed. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Investigators realized they weren't coaxing information from Caleb, they were walking into his design, his slow, methodical unveiling of a truth he had controlled for decades. Hours later, the forensic team delivered the next blow. Among the scattered remains, they discovered an object partially fused to a bone fragment, a metal clasp, corroded but identifiable. It matched the broken half of a bracelet Mara's mother confirmed she had worn the night she vanished. The matching half was never found. Until now. This small discovery re-energized the town. Hope flared. Vigils grew. But the task force knew the truth was still tangled beneath layers they hadn't peeled back. Then came the moment that cracked the investigation wide open. A storm rolled into the desert unexpectedly, hammering the ravine with rain so hard the soil split and buckled. When the storm passed, officers returned to the site to ensure equipment hadn't been damaged. Instead, they found a new opening in the ground, a collapsed section revealing a hollow chamber beneath the sandstone. Inside, lying undisturbed for years, were additional remains. Not scattered. Not moved. Not staged. A cluster of bones arranged with eerie intentionality, positioned carefully, almost reverently. Detective Stanton stared into the hollow space, her breath caught in her throat. The pattern. The arrangement. The way the bones rested, as if placed according to some private ritual. This wasn't random. This was intimate. Back at the precinct, she confronted Caleb with the new findings. His expression finally changed, subtle, but unmistakable. His eyes widened slightly, his breathing deepened, and for the first time since his arrest, the mask slipped enough to reveal something raw. Recognition. You found it, he whispered. Detective Stanton leaned forward. Tell me what it is. Caleb looked at the floor, lips pressed tightly together. Then he lifted his eyes and stared directly into hers as though he were handing her a truth she was not prepared to receive. That, he said softly, is where she stayed. Detective Stanton's pulse pounded. Stayed? Caleb, what does that mean? Did she die there? Was she placed there? Did you? Caleb raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. She stayed, he repeated. Because she wasn't alone. The words dropped between them like stones, heavy and final. The observation team froze. Officers held their breath. The entire precinct seemed to tilt. Not alone. Not alone. Detective Stanton's throat tightened as she whispered, Are you telling us there's someone else out there? Caleb smiled. No, he said. I'm telling you there was someone else with her. The difference between out there and with her sent a chilling ripple through the room. The investigation was no longer about a single suspect. It was about unraveling who, or what, had been part of the night Mara vanished. And, most terrifyingly, whether Caleb had acted alone. The word together echoed through the interrogation room long after Caleb fell silent, an echo that seemed to seep into the walls, sink into the concrete, and coil itself around every member of the task force. She wasn't alone. She stayed. Someone else with her. Each fragment felt like a blow delivered with surgical precision, snapping assumptions in half and sending investigators spiraling toward possibilities they had never prepared for. Detective Aria Stanton stepped out of the interrogation room, her pulse hammering in her throat. The observation team stared at her with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Someone else had been involved. Someone who had never been named, never been suspected, never even appeared in the background of the original investigation. This wasn't a single perpetrator crime. It wasn't a lone abductor orchestrating a disappearance under cover of desert darkness. It was something coordinated. Controlled. Shared. The ground shifted beneath the investigation. For the next 48 hours, detectives tore through every record involving Caleb Rowan, phone logs, employment files, leases, bank statements, vehicle registrations. Anyone he worked with. Anyone he lived near. Anyone he met. Anyone he might have confided in. But Caleb had lived a life designed to leave no ripples. No close friends. No romantic partners. No social ties. His neighbors barely knew his last name. His co-workers remembered a man who answered questions with nods, not words. No one recalled him forming relationships strong enough to pull another person into something as monstrous as an abduction. Yet his words remained, she wasn't alone. Detectives reviewed the storage unit again, this time with a level of scrutiny bordering on obsession. They re-examined every crate, flipped through every page of his notebook, scanned every receipt, traced every tool for serial numbers. And then, buried beneath a stack of outdated manuals, they found a torn envelope containing a faded photograph. The image was grainy, sun-damaged, nearly lost to time. But the face was unmistakable. Caleb wasn't alone in the picture. A second person stood beside him, half-turned, as if caught mid-motion. A man in his 20s. Dark hair. Sharp jaw. Unlabeled. Unidentified. And worst of all, familiar. Detective Stanton felt her stomach twist when she recognized him. His name surfaced not from the old case files but from the town's memory, a name spoken in past tense, a life cut short years after Mara vanished. Evan Hale. A local mechanic who died in a single-vehicle accident in 2004. A man who had never been tied to the disappearance, never interviewed, never flagged as a person of interest because, back then, there was no reason to. Until now. The realization was a crack of thunder across the investigation. Evan was alive during Mara's disappearance. He worked at the same manufacturing facility as Caleb. Their employment dates overlapped for 2 years. They lived less than a mile apart. And according to the old staff roster, they worked the same night shift for months. Detective Stanton stared at the photograph again. Evan Hale's expression was neutral, almost kind, but his eyes, if you stared long enough, held a glimmer of something harder to define. A shadow. A secret. A void. Why had Caleb kept the photo? Why hide it? Why risk holding on to proof that tied him to someone else? Because, Detective Stanton realized, the photo was not a liability. It was a memory. A piece of a story he wasn't finished telling. She returned to the interrogation room with the photograph in hand. Caleb lifted his eyes as soon as she entered, as though he sensed the shift. "You knew him," she said, placing the photo on the table. Caleb's gaze lingered on the fading image. A small tightening appeared in the muscles around his eyes, an emotion flickering for a fraction of a second before vanishing. "Everyone knew Evan," he said quietly. "But not like you did." Caleb leaned back, the cuff pulling taut. "What do you think you know?" Detective Stanton didn't blink. "That Mara wasn't alone. That someone else helped you. That someone else was with her. The man in this photo." Caleb stared at the image the way a person might stare at a gravestone, recognizing the shape but no longer connected to what lay beneath. "He's dead," Caleb said. "That doesn't erase his part in this." Caleb lowered his eyes to the table, and for the first time since his arrest, his voice cracked, not with guilt, but with something close to grief. "He was supposed to stay," he whispered. Detective Stanton froze. "Stay where?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her expression, as if gauging how much she could handle. Then, with a voice stripped to its core, he added, "He was supposed to keep her company." The silence that followed felt radioactive. Detective Stanton leaned in, her voice razor-sharp. "You need to explain what that means." But Caleb closed his eyes and retreated behind the wall he'd lived behind for 24 years. "You'll understand soon," he murmured. "You've already started finding the pieces." It took every ounce of control for Detective Stanton not to slam the table. Instead, she exited the room, her heart pounding. The task force now had 2 suspects, one alive, one dead, but neither fully explained the scope of what was unfolding. The question wasn't simply who took Mara. It was why. With the discovery of multiple burial sites, a hidden chamber, deliberate scattering of remains, and cryptic statements about company, investigators feared they were no longer looking at a singular crime but something ritualistic, or ideological, or deeply psychological. The medical examiner called later that night with their own chilling revelation. The remains from the hollow chamber, the ones arranged intentionally, showed signs of post-mortem manipulation. Not random. Not careless. Someone had placed the bones with deliberate spacing and orientation, forming a pattern that forensic anthropologists recognized as symbolic. A pattern often associated with offenders who assign meaning to their victims long after death. Detective Stanton felt the room tilt. If the remains were arranged with intent, then the hollow chamber wasn't simply a resting site. It was a shrine. At dawn, investigators spread across the ravine once more. The storm had carved new cuts in the terrain, revealing faint trails, compacted layers, and disturbed earth in places no one expected. On a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall, officers found something wedged between two rocks, something small, glinting in the morning sun. A ring. A simple silver band engraved with initials worn nearly smooth. M.E. Detective Stanton held it in her palm, the metal cold against her skin. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just another fragment. This was a message. And it wasn't meant for investigators. It was meant for Caleb. Back at the precinct, she entered the interrogation room and placed the ring on the table. Caleb's reaction was immediate, his eyes widened, his breath hitched, his mask cracked. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said, voice trembling faintly. Detective Stanton pounced. "Why? Was it yours? Hers? His?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "It wasn't meant for you." "Then who was it meant for?" He looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, truly, the darkness beneath his calm exterior surfaced. "For Evan." A chill washed through the room. Detective Stanton's voice dropped. "He was supposed to find it." Caleb nodded slowly. "He left things for me. I left things for him. That's how it worked." Detective Stanton felt her blood run cold. Even after she disappeared. Caleb's next words landed like a blade. "Especially after." The observation team froze behind the mirror. Officers outside halted mid-step. Air seemed to drain out of the building. This wasn't merely a shared crime. This was a sustained connection. A ritualized communication between two men long after the victim was gone. A secret bond that persisted even after Evan's death. But one question now loomed larger than the others. If Evan Hale died in 2004, who continued leaving messages after that? Detective Stanton voiced it aloud. If Evan died, who left the last markers? The ones placed years later. Caleb's expression changed, slow, eerie, almost tender. "You keep assuming I was leaving things for him," he murmured. Detective Stanton felt her heart stop. "Then who were you leaving them for?" Caleb leaned forward, chains rattling softly as he whispered. "For her." A silence unlike any before swallowed the room. Detective Stanton steadied her voice. "She was gone, Caleb." He shook his head slowly, eyes burning with a conviction that made her skin crawl. "She wasn't." Detective Stanton swallowed hard. "Are you telling me she survived?" Caleb's gaze drifted toward the mirror, as though speaking to someone beyond the glass. "I'm telling you she stayed," he said. "Long after you thought she was gone." "But how?" Detective Stanton pressed. Caleb closed his eyes, breathing deeply, as if inhaling memories the desert refused to release. "She stayed," he repeated, "because she had nowhere else to go." Detective Stanton's voice sharpened. "Where, Caleb? Where did she stay?" Caleb opened his eyes. And spoke the words that shattered the investigation. "In the dark." He bowed his head, whispering the next part like a prayer. And she wasn't the only one. Detective Stanton's pulse roared in her ears. Someone else. Another victim. The cold case wasn't just reopening. It was multiplying. The words "she wasn't the only one" cut through the precinct like a blade dropped onto stone. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Officers froze in doorways. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to falter, as though the entire building recoiled from the implication. Another victim. Another life hidden under 24 years of silence. Another shadow stretching across a desert that already held too many. Detective Aria Stanton stood motionless, fingers gripping the edge of the interrogation table, knuckles whitening. Caleb's head remained bowed, eyes closed as though savoring the weight his words carried. When he finally lifted his gaze, the room felt smaller, the air thinner. "Tell me who," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Caleb shook his head slowly. "You're looking for names." A thin smile crept across his face. But names were never the point. Detective Stanton leaned forward. "Then what was the point?" Caleb blinked, slow, deliberate. "Company." The single word hung in the air like smoke from a burnt-out match. Detective Stanton's pulse spiked. "You said she wasn't alone," she pressed. "You said someone else stayed with her in the dark. Who were you talking about? Evan? Another victim? Someone you never mentioned?" Caleb studied her with unsettling calmness, as though watching someone try to assemble a puzzle he'd purposely scattered. "You think darkness swallows people," he murmured. "But sometimes it keeps them. Holds them. Protects them." Detective Stanton slammed her hand against the table, rattling the chains. "Stop speaking in riddles. Who was with her?" Caleb's eyes flickered with something almost triumphant. "She wasn't alone," he repeated softly. "Because I wasn't the first." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Detective Stanton's feet. "You're telling me someone else took her before you got involved?" Caleb tilted his head, studying the ceiling. "Involved," he echoed, amused. "No. It's not what you think." Then his gaze lowered, pinning her in place. "You asked who left signs after Evan died. You asked who the messages were for." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe you should ask who left them for me." The temperature in the room plunged. Detective Stanton stepped back, heart pounding. "Are you telling me someone else was part of this, someone who is still alive?" Caleb closed his eyes again, but this time, his face hardened. "Alive isn't the word I would use." Before she could speak again, a frantic knock sounded on the interrogation room door. A junior detective burst in, breathless, holding a stack of printed documents. "Detective Stanton, there's something you need to see. Now." She shot one last glance at Caleb, who smiled faintly, almost knowingly, before rushing into the hallway. The junior detective handed her the files with trembling fingers. "These are missing persons reports," he said. "Old ones. Ones that match the timeline you asked us to cross-reference." Detective Stanton flipped through the pages. Her chest tightened. 3 names. 3 disappearances. All within a 50-mile radius of Cobalt Ridge. All within 18 months leading up to Mara's vanishing. Each victim, young. Female. Walking alone at night. And the most chilling detail, each case dismissed at the time as runaways. No searches. No vigils. No investigations. Because the disappearances stopped after Mara Ellison. Or so everyone believed. Detective Stanton felt a surge of nausea. Why didn't anyone connect these before? The junior detective swallowed hard. 2 departments. 2 counties. Poor communication. Records weren't digitized at the time. But one thing tied all 3 cases together, one detail that slammed into Detective Stanton like a punch to the ribs. Each missing woman was last seen on or near Ridgeway Road. Just like Mara. She stormed back into the interrogation room, slamming the files onto the table. Caleb's eyes remained calm, almost serene. 3 girls, she said. All missing before Mara. All disappeared from the same area. How long did this go on before 2001? Caleb's gaze drifted downward. The desert has always taken people, he murmured. No, Stanton snapped. Someone did. Caleb finally met her eyes, and in them she saw something colder than guilt, belief. A kind of faith twisted into something monstrous. I wasn't the first, he said softly. Detective Stanton's breath caught. Then who was? Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper, the chain tightening as he leaned forward. You're assuming he stopped, he said. Stanton stepped back as if struck, her legs trembling. He? You said Evan. I said Evan stayed with her, Caleb corrected. Not that he was the first. Not that he was the last. Detective Stanton's stomach twisted violently. You're telling me there was someone before Evan too? Caleb nodded once. And someone after. A cold wave washed over the room. Someone after you were arrested, she demanded. Caleb's silence was answer enough. Detective Stanton darted out of the room, panic clawing at her throat. The task force scrambled, pulling records, mapping disappearances, cross-referencing terrain, cell tower data, utility access logs, anything that might have slipped through the cracks. Patterns emerged like ink rising through paper. The disappearances didn't stop with Mara. They paused. Shifted. Restarted. Someone else continued what had begun long before Caleb entered the picture. But the most disturbing pattern wasn't the timeline of disappearances. It was geography. Every missing woman vanished near Ridgeway Road. But their last known footprints led not into the desert. Not toward the ravine. Not toward the hollow chamber where part of Mara's remains were found. All paths pointed somewhere else entirely. A cluster of dots on the map concentrated around a single location. A defunct drainage tunnel system running beneath the oldest part of town. Abandoned since 1987. Officers stared at the map in shock as Detective Stanton traced her finger along the paths. Open it, she ordered. That night, search teams entered the tunnel system with industrial lamps, protective suits, respirators. Air hissed in their masks as they descended into the darkness thick as ink, swallowing their light beams, swallowing their footsteps. Inside, the walls dripped with condensation. Rusted pipes groaned overhead. The floor sloped toward an old runoff basin, still half-filled with stagnant water thick as oil. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the darkness became. Radios crackled with static. Officers' voices echoed back at them in distorted whispers. The tunnel felt alive. Then someone shouted. Over here! Detective Stanton rushed toward the beam of a flashlight trembling violently against the wall. There, carved into the concrete, were markings, deep scratches, chaotic, desperate. A fingernail embedded in the groove. A fingernail. Stanton's blood ran cold. Another officer called her name. She turned to see a cluster of objects piled in a recess of the tunnel. A shoe. A torn sleeve. A clump of hair. And a journal, water-damaged, pages melted together, but still legible enough to read the first line. He comes back at night. He always comes back. Detective Stanton clutched the journal, her breath tearing in and out of her lungs. This wasn't Caleb's writing. It wasn't Evan's. It was someone else's handwriting entirely, a woman's, thin and trembling. A victim they had never known existed. A victim who had lived long enough in the dark to write. The tunnels stretched deeper still. Officers found out, calling out findings, scraps of clothing, rusted chains, pieces of fabric wedged in cracks, old food wrappers, scratch marks forming patterns detectives didn't want to interpret. And then, at the far end of the tunnel, beneath a grate that hadn't been opened in decades, they found something that made the entire search team fall silent. A small wooden box. Weathered. Warped. But intact. Inside was a collection of items arranged with care. A ribbon. A ring. A necklace. A lock of hair tied with twine. And at the bottom, a photograph. Detective Stanton lifted it with trembling fingers. The lighting was dim. Blurry. But the image showed a man standing in the tunnel, half turned toward the camera, holding a lantern. Not Caleb. Not Evan. Someone older. Someone unknown. Someone who had looked into the camera with eyes that glowed unnaturally bright in the reflection. Stanton's breath vanished. Caleb's words returned, cold as desert night. I wasn't the first. I wasn't the last. You keep assuming he stopped. She whispered into the darkness, dear God, how many were there? When she returned to the precinct, storm-drenched, mud-streaked, shaking, she entered the interrogation room with the photograph in hand. She tossed it onto the table. Caleb looked at it and froze. Not because he didn't recognize the man, but because he did. And because he hadn't expected them to find him. Detective Stanton leaned down, voice trembling but sharp as a blade. Who is he? Caleb swallowed hard. For the first time since his arrest, since the beginning, he looked afraid. His voice cracked. He was the one who taught us. Detective Stanton's heart nearly stopped. Taught you what? Caleb lifted his eyes, pupils blown wide with terror or reverence. Detective Stanton couldn't tell the difference. To keep them, he whispered. The room spun. The investigation had broken open. Not into a cold case, but into a lineage. A legacy. A chain of darkness stretching back decades. And the man in the photograph. He was still unaccounted for. Still unidentified. Still out there. And he had never been caught. The moment Caleb whispered, he taught us to keep them, the investigation crossed a threshold no one could have imagined. It was no longer confined to the disappearance of one woman in 2001. It was no longer bound to the actions of one man, or even two. It had exploded into something sprawling, generational, ritualistic, a chain of darkness passed from one set of hands to the next like a legacy twisted beyond comprehension. Detective Aria Stanton stood frozen in the interrogation room, staring at the photograph of the man in the tunnel. His eyes, reflective, predatory, seemed to stare back at her, alive with a presence that reached across decades. Caleb's fear was unmistakable. Real. Deep-seated. The kind of fear that rewrote the hierarchy of monsters. He wasn't afraid of being arrested, or imprisoned, or exposed. He was afraid of him. Detective Stanton forced herself to speak, though her voice felt thin under the weight of what hung in the air. His name. Give me his name. Caleb closed his eyes as though bracing himself for impact. When he opened them again, something had drained out of his expression, resolve, maybe, or whatever fragile hold he believed he still had over the narrative. I don't know his real name, he whispered. Stanton's jaw clenched. Then what did you call him? Caleb swallowed hard, eyes flickering to the photograph like it still held dominion over him. He told us to call him the Keeper. The word slithered through the room like a toxin. The Keeper. Not a name. A title. A role. A position passed down. Stanton felt her chest tighten. Us, she repeated, her voice suddenly razor-sharp. You keep saying us. How many? Caleb's gaze drifted downward. There were always at least two, he said softly. Sometimes three. He said it had to be that way. Balance. Control. Witness. Detective Stanton felt a cold pulse shoot down her spine. Witness. The implication was unbearable. Someone always watched. Someone always learned. Someone always continued. So Evan Hale, Stanton pressed, he was part of this whatever this is. Caleb nodded. He was chosen. Like I was. Chosen by whom? Caleb glanced at the photograph again, eyes haunted. By him. Detective Stanton exhaled slowly, trying to maintain control as the ground shifted beneath her. So the Keeper recruited you? Caleb shook his head. He didn't recruit. He invited. The distinction chilled her more than she expected. Invitations implied acceptance. Choice. Complicity. What did he teach you? She demanded. Caleb hesitated. The room seemed to contract, the air thickening as every officer behind the glass leaned closer. "He taught us how to take them," Caleb said finally. "How to follow without being seen. How to guide them where they'd go willingly. How to keep them calm at first. How to make sure no one heard." His voice trembled slightly. "He taught us the dark wasn't something to fear. It was something to control." Detective Stanton felt bile rise in her throat. "And what did he teach you about keeping them?" Caleb's expression grew distant, hollow. "He said people forget screams. They forget footprints. They forget missing posters. But Bones," he lifted his cuffed wrist, tapping the cold metal against the table. Clink. "Bones remember. Bones stay." Detective Stanton wanted to recoil, but she forced herself to stand firm. "Did he teach you to scatter remains across the ravine?" Caleb nodded. "He said the earth was too big for people to see the patterns, but not too big for him." His shoulders slumped slightly. "We followed his ways. We continued them." "We," Stanton repeated, her voice trembling with contained fury. "You and Evan." "And the ones before us," Caleb whispered. "The ones after us." Their words landed like a detonator blast. "The ones after." Stanton's voice cracked. Caleb didn't look at her. "It never ended," he murmured. "He didn't let it." Detective Stanton snapped. She slammed the table with such force the chain rattled violently. "Then where is he? If he's alive, if he's still out there, if you know." But Caleb finally broke. His voice rose, not in rage, not in defiance, but in something far more chilling, devotion. "He never left." Caleb shouted. "The keeper doesn't disappear. He doesn't run. He doesn't get caught. He stays where the dark is deepest." Stanton recoiled. Caleb's outburst wasn't a strategy. It was belief. Fanaticism. The keeper wasn't just a mentor. He was a figure of worship. Before Stanton could regain control, the precinct doors exploded open with the chaos of officers shouting, papers falling, phones ringing all at once. A sergeant rushed to the interrogation room. "Detective Stanton, urgent. Now." She followed him down the hallway toward the digital lab. Analysts huddled around multiple screens, faces pale, eyes fixed on something horrifying. One of them pointed at the monitor. "We enhanced the photograph," he said shakily. "Watch." The blurry tunnel image sharpened, grain by grain, pixel by pixel. The lantern's glare faded. The man's face came into view. Gray beard. Creased skin. Eyes reflecting the camera's flash like an animal staring back from the night. But it was the background, just behind the keeper's shoulder, that made Detective Stanton's breath freeze. A shape. A silhouette. Small. Hunched. Arms wrapped around knees. It wasn't a person standing there. It was someone sitting. Waiting. A girl. Her hair matted. Her face ghost pale. Her eyes wide open, staring directly at the camera. Detective Stanton staggered backward, gripping the edge of a desk. "Is that?" "No," the analyst whispered. "It's not Mara Ellison. The facial structure doesn't match. This is someone else. Someone no one even knew was missing. A ghost trapped in a photograph with the man who kept her." The analysts displayed metadata. The timestamp made Stanton's heart stop. 1989. 12 years before Mara vanished. "Dear God," one officer whispered. "There were others," Stanton said numbly. "There were always others." She sprinted back toward the interrogation room. Caleb sat motionless, as though expecting her return. Stanton threw the enhanced photo onto the table. "Is this her? One of the others?" Caleb didn't look. "Look at it!" Stanton shouted, slamming her fist down. Caleb lifted his eyes. The moment he saw the girl, something inside him cracked, not with sadness, but recognition. "She stayed the longest," he murmured. Stanton's knees nearly buckled. Who was she? Caleb's answer was nearly inaudible. She was the first one I ever saw down there. Stanton pressed a hand to her forehead. And the keeper? Was he the one who took her? Caleb nodded. She was his. Stanton's voice dropped to a whisper. And Mara? Was she his too? A pause. A deep, suffocating pause. No, Caleb said. She was ours. Detective Stanton felt the world tilt. Meaning what? Caleb's expression darkened with memory. Evan found her first. I followed. We led her toward the ravine. She was meant to stay in the dark like the others. But she didn't, Stanton whispered. No, Caleb said. She fought. Detective Stanton closed her eyes. So you killed her? Caleb didn't flinch. We didn't mean to. She panicked. The keeper said they only stayed if they were calm. Stanton inhaled sharply, nausea rising again. Caleb looked at the photograph of the girl from 1989, almost fondly. She stayed for years. Long after he stopped visiting. Stanton's eyes filled with horror. Meaning he died? Left? What? Caleb shook his head, eyes gleaming. He never left. Stanton's heart stuttered. Then where is he now? Caleb raised his cuffed hands slightly. Waiting. Stanton snapped, waiting where? Caleb smiled, slow, haunting. Where he always waits. In the dark. Stanton leaned forward, rage and terror colliding in her voice. Give me a location. A landmark. A name. Something. Caleb exhaled slowly, almost peacefully. You already found the entrance. Stanton froze. The tunnel. Caleb nodded. But you didn't go deep enough. A chill surged through Stanton's chest. How deep does it go? Caleb's eyes turned glassy. It goes until the dark becomes him. A sickening silence filled the room. Officers behind the mirror felt their legs go weak. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Cobalt Ridge like a bruise spreading across the sky. Wind whipped dust through the streets. The town descended into a tension it hadn't felt since the summer of 2001, but heavier, darker, because now they knew the truth. Mara Ellison wasn't the first. And she wasn't the last. Because the keeper's work had never been stopped. Only interrupted. Detective Stanton straightened, resolve hardening like steel. We're going back into those tunnels, she said. No, Caleb whispered, eyes widening. You're not ready. Stanton turned toward the door. We're going deeper. Caleb slammed his cuffed wrists onto the table. He'll hear you. Stanton didn't look back. Good, she said. Let him. As she left the room, Caleb whispered something so soft it was nearly lost beneath the hum of the precinct lights. He hears everything. And in the storm-darkened streets of Cobalt Ridge, the tunnels beneath the town waited. Silent. Breathing. Hungry. The storm battered Cobalt Ridge through the night, ripping across rooftops, slamming dust against windows, and shaking the street lamps until their light flickered like dying candles. But beneath the storm, beneath the trembling asphalt and the rattling storefront signs, the tunnels lay silent. Waiting. As though the darkness itself had paused to listen to the chaos above, preparing for the footsteps it knew were coming. Detective Aria Stanton gathered her task force at dawn. The storm clouds still hung low, bruised and heavy, but the rain had eased into a cold mist clinging to everything. Officers strapped on tactical gear, headlamps, respirators, radios. No one spoke. The silence carried weight, a collective understanding that they were heading into a place not meant for the living. The entrance to the old drainage tunnel yawned like a wound in the earth, half swallowed by overgrown brush and twisted metal fencing. The storm had loosened debris, revealing cracks and fissures they hadn't noticed before. As Stanton approached, the temperature seemed to drop, a chill seeping up from the concrete as though the tunnel exhaled into the dawn. She flashed her light inside. Dark. Immeasurable. Alive. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Ross, stepped beside her. "This isn't a recovery mission anymore," he whispered. "This is something else." Stanton nodded once. "We go in slow. We stay in contact. No one breaks formation." But even as she said it, she felt something primal stirring under her ribs, an instinct screaming that rules would mean nothing down there. Not where he lived. Not where he waited. They entered the tunnel one by one, boots splashing through stagnant water that rippled with each step. Echoes rebounded in disorienting patterns, turning every drip and shift into a whisper. Stanton's headlamp carved a narrow beam through the darkness, but it felt swallowed almost instantly, devoured by shadows thicker than the air should allow. As they descended deeper, the walls changed. The graffiti disappeared. The airflow stilled. The humidity climbed. And scratch marks, long, desperate gouges, began to appear along the concrete. At first only a few. Then dozens. Then hundreds, layered atop one another until the walls looked flayed. Lieutenant Ross whispered, "How many people have been down here?" Stanton didn't answer. Because she didn't know if the real question was how many went in. Or how many came out. Minutes stretched into an hour. They followed the path discovered during the first search, the path that led to the journal, the recess of belongings, the rusted chains. But Stanton pushed them further. Past the familiar. Past the mapped territory. Past the limits they believed existed. And the deeper they went, the more the tunnel changed. It sloped downward. Then twisted. Then widened. Then narrowed so sharply they had to turn sideways to pass. The concrete gradually gave way to exposed rock. Old metal brackets rusted into jagged teeth. Pipes bent and warped as though crushed by immense pressure. And the darkness thickened until their lights no longer illuminated space, they simply pressed against an invisible barrier. Ross raised his radio. "Command, do you copy?" Static. He tried again. Nothing. Stanton felt a cold pulse across her fingertips. "Keep going," she ordered. They reached a chamber, a large one, where the ceiling arched like the ribcage of a buried beast. Water dripped steadily from above, pooling in a basin carved by decades of erosion. The sound echoed unnaturally long, bouncing back in delayed rhythms. Stanton swept her light across the chamber. Her breath caught. Bones. Not scattered like those in the ravine. Not arranged neatly like those in the hollow chamber. These bones lay tangled, broken, twisted, piled in corners like discarded remnants of a forgotten purpose. Femurs. Ribs. Finger bones. Pieces of jaw. A mosaic of silence. Ross muttered a curse under his breath. Another officer dropped to his knees, gagging. Stanton approached slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. She crouched beside the nearest pile, careful not to disturb it. Something glinted among the remains. A bracelet. Silver. Engraved with initials. S.H. Another victim. Another life erased. Ross swallowed hard. How far back does this go? Stanton didn't know. But she knew one thing. The keeper had been here long before Caleb. Long before Evan. Long before Mara. Her radio crackled suddenly, a sharp, jagged burst of static that made everyone flinch. Then a voice. Faint. Warped. Distorted. Stop. Ross grabbed his radio. Command, repeat that. Turn back. The voice crackled again, then dissolved into static. That wasn't command, Stanton whispered. Before anyone could respond, a metallic clang echoed from deeper inside the tunnel. Officers whipped around, light slicing through the dark. The sound had come from a passage to the right, narrow, steep, almost unnatural in shape. Ross whispered, "There's someone down here." Stanton felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Yes," she said. "There is." They moved toward the passage, weapons drawn. The air grew colder. Their lights dimmed, ever so slightly, as though something pulled energy from them. The passage descended sharply, forcing them to climb carefully, gripping jagged stones to keep balance. The deeper they went, the more Stanton felt something pressing against her chest, not weight, not fear, something older than that. Presence. They reached the bottom. The air was still. Thick. Cold. Stanton's breath formed mist. Her light swept across the stone chamber. And froze. In the center of the room, illuminated by some trick of reflection, stood a wooden chair. Old. Rotting. Bound to the rock floor by rusted bolts. On the chair, resting neatly on the seat, was a small object. A lantern. The exact lantern from the photograph. Ross whispered, "No way. That can't be the same one." Stanton didn't answer. Because beside the chair, carved into the rock, deep caverns cut by a blade, was a symbol. A circle. A vertical line through its center. Two horizontal lines branching outward like broken arms. It was the same symbol etched repeatedly into the notebook from Caleb's storage unit. The keeper's mark. Stanton approached the lantern slowly, heart pounding with every step. As she reached out a trembling hand, the lantern flickered. Once. Twice. Dim orange light sputtered inside. A flame. A flame that should not exist. Ross stepped back. "Detective, don't touch it." But it was too late. The lantern flared bright, illuminating the far wall of the chamber. A wall covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Different decades. Different girls. Different faces. All staring blankly into the camera. All marked with the keeper's symbol in the corner. Stanton staggered backward, gasping. "Oh my God." Ross swallowed hard. "How many victims is that?" Stanton shook her head. "It's not just victims." She pointed to the side of the wall. Another section. Photographs of men. Pairs of them. Always two. Each pair standing in the tunnels. Some faces familiar. Some not. Evan Hale. Caleb Rowan. Others she'd never seen before. Successors, Stanton whispered. He chose them. Trained them. Passed it on. Then she froze. Because the last photograph, pinned lower on the wall, newer than the others, showed a man standing alone. Older. Tall. Gray-bearded. Eyes glowing like an animal in the dark. The keeper. Next to him was an empty space. A blank square pinned to the stone with no photograph. Ross frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Stanton exhaled shakily. I think it's reserved. For who? Stanton stared into the empty space. For whoever he chooses next. Before Ross could respond, a chilling sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps. Soft. Measured. Coming from behind them. Officers spun around, lights trembling. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. Deep. Calm. Ancient. You've gone too far. The entire team froze. Stanton's breath hitched. Identify yourself. Ross shouted. The voice replied. I am the keeper. Stanton felt her blood turn to ice. The voice was close. Too close. But the tunnel behind them remained empty. No movement. No shape. Only darkness. Stanton lifted her weapon. Show yourself. A low chuckle rolled through the chamber. I already have. Then the lantern went out. Pitch black swallowed the room. Officers screamed. Radios crackled. Boots slammed against stone. The sound that followed was worse than anything Stanton had imagined. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Right behind her. She spun around, firing her weapon blindly as flashlights flickered in chaos, beams slicing through nothing. But Stanton felt him, moving past her like a cold wind. Invisible. Watching. Choosing. Her radio screamed with static. Then a whisper leaked through the distortion. "Tell Caleb I'm not done." The darkness shifted. A gust of air swept through the chamber. And then, silence. Lights flickered back on. No figure. No footsteps. No trace. Except for one thing. On the wooden chair, where the lantern had rested seconds before, now sat a new photograph. Stanton lifted it with trembling fingers. It showed Caleb Rowan sitting in his interrogation room. Taken from an angle impossible for any camera in the building. And behind him, a shadow. A tall figure. Hand resting on Caleb's shoulder. Stanton's heart stopped. Ross whispered, "He's been inside the precinct." "No," Stanton said, voice trembling. "He never left." Above them, somewhere deep in the tunnels, a faint echo drifted down the stone corridors. A single word. A name. Mara. And Detective Stanton realized. They hadn't come to find the keeper. The keeper had brought them here. The photograph of Caleb with the shadow behind him didn't just rattle the room, it detonated it. Officers stumbled back. Ross swore under his breath. Someone whispered a prayer. Detective Aria Stanton felt the ground sway beneath her as if the earth itself had pulled away. It wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message from the keeper, delivered with surgical precision: "I can go wherever I want. Whenever I want. And you won't see me coming." Stanton shoved the photograph into an evidence sleeve with shaking hands and turned to her team. "We're pulling out," she said. "Everyone. Now." They didn't argue. Tactical lights swung wildly as boots splashed through black water, echoing through the cavernous tunnels. The air seemed to grow colder behind them as if something ancient watched their retreat. Stanton forced herself to keep her eyes forward, not daring to glance back at the chamber of bones, the chair, the empty photograph space reserved like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. But even as they climbed back into the narrower passages, Stanton felt it, the sense that the darkness was following them. Not because something moved. Not because she heard footsteps. But because the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was aware. They reached the tunnel entrance without losing anyone, but the moment they stepped into daylight, the entire team stumbled, blinded by the contrast. Cold morning air flooded their lungs like shock therapy. Officers leaned against vehicles, panting, shaking, some openly crying from the adrenaline crash. Ross ripped off his respirator. "That thing, that voice," his sentence broke apart. "What the hell is he?" Stanton didn't answer because she didn't know. And because the photograph, stark, impossible, undeniable, left her with a truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. The keeper wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a hallucination. He wasn't a myth whispered to terrify children in desert towns. He was real. He was alive. And he was watching them. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere had changed entirely. Doors were locked. Blinds drawn. Officers moved in tight clusters, voices hushed. The idea that the keeper had been inside the building, close enough to stand behind Caleb in the interrogation room, spawned an infection of paranoia. Every hallway felt wrong. Every shadow felt too deep. Every camera angle was reviewed again and again, searching for a glitch, a flicker, a trace of the man who seemed to slip between places like smoke. But there was nothing. No breach in security. No malfunction. No unexplained entry. No figure caught on screen. It was as though he had appeared and disappeared inside the building without ever touching the doors. Stanton entered the interrogation room. Caleb sat exactly where she'd left him, hands cuffed, posture rigid, eyes unfocused. She tossed the photograph onto the table. It slid across the metal and stopped in front of him. Caleb stared at it. And the blood drained from his face. You saw him, Stanton said, voice flat, brittle. Didn't you? Caleb's lips parted, but no sound came out. Stanton slammed her palms onto the table. He was in this room, Caleb. Standing behind you. And you didn't warn us. Caleb's breath shook. You can't stop him, he whispered. You didn't answer my question. Caleb swallowed hard. I felt him. I didn't want to look. Stanton's voice sharpened. Why? Because you were afraid. Caleb looked up slowly, and Stanton saw something in his eyes she had never seen in any suspect during her entire career. A deeper fear. A fear of something greater than justice. He doesn't like being seen, Caleb whispered. Not until he's ready. Stanton's skin prickled with cold. Then what does he want now? Caleb lowered his gaze. To finish what we interrupted. Stanton stepped back. Mara is dead, Caleb. Caleb didn't look up. You don't understand. She wasn't the only one he kept. His voice cracked. And she wasn't the only one who stayed. Before Stanton could respond, the precinct lights flickered, briefly. A ripple of darkness swept across the room, carrying a low hum through the walls like the building exhaled. Ross burst into the interrogation room. Detective, you need to see this. Now. Stanton followed him to the operations room, where a cluster of officers hovered around a monitor. One of the analysts rewound footage. This is from 5 minutes ago. The screen showed an empty hallway. Normal. Quiet. Then the lights flickered again. A shadow bled across the floor, long, elongated, stretched unnaturally as if cast by someone standing far too close to the lens. But no figure appeared. Only the shadow. Moving. Turning. Pausing as though looking through the camera. Someone gasped. Another officer stepped back. Ross whispered, "It's him." Stanton gripped the back of a chair until her fingers hurt. It wasn't just a threat. It wasn't just intimidation. The keeper wasn't hiding. He was circling. He was inspecting. He was choosing. The analyst scrubbed through more footage. More shadows. More flickers. More distortions that couldn't be explained by wiring or weather. The keeper had walked through this building like it belonged to him. And maybe, in some way Stanton refused to admit, it did. Hours later, the FBI arrived, flooding the precinct with federal presence, heavier weapons, deeper fear, sharper questions. They demanded to isolate Caleb. Demanded total control of the tunnels. Demanded access to every piece of evidence. But Stanton saw it in their faces as she briefed them. Fear. Real fear. Because they had seen the photograph too. And because they understood the threat had escalated beyond a cold case. This was a predator with decades of experience evading detection. A man who moved through structures undetected. A man who left no trace, no sound, no footprint. A man who chose apprentices. A man who kept victims alive long past their disappearance. A man who, even now, walked freely beneath Cobalt Ridge. And then, another blow. A reporter leaked news of the tunnels. News of the keeper. News of multiple victims. By nightfall, the entire town was in panic. Streets emptied. Doors locked. Windows boarded. Parents pulled children from schools. The mayor held an emergency press conference, his voice trembling as he denied details that were already undeniable. The town had never felt smaller. Never felt darker. Stanton watched the chaos unfold from the precinct window. The storm clouds had lifted, but the darkness clinging to the town was thicker than any weather. Ross approached quietly. "We need to shut the tunnels." Stanton didn't turn. No. He'd just find another way. "We can't let him move freely, Arya." Stanton finally faced him. "He already does." Ross didn't argue. Because he knew she was right. At midnight, a scream erupted outside the precinct. Officers sprinted out the front doors, weapons drawn. A woman stood in the middle of the street, barefoot, soaked, trembling violently. Mud streaked her arms and legs. Her hair hung in tangled ropes. She had no coat. No shoes. No sense of where she was. Stanton approached her cautiously. Can you hear me? The woman lifted her face. And Stanton's blood froze. It was the girl from the photograph. The one from 1989. Alive. Barely. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He let me go." Officers gasped. One dropped his flashlight. Stanton knelt beside her, heart pounding. "Who let you go?" "The keeper." The woman shook her head violently, eyes wide with terror. "No," she sobbed. "Not him." Stanton's breath caught. "Then who?" The woman clutched her trembling hands to her chest. "Her." Silence crushed the street. Stanton's voice barely escaped her lips. "Her who?" The woman leaned forward, her whisper colder than the desert wind. "The girl you're looking for. The one from 2001. Stanton's heart stopped. "Mara." The woman nodded weakly, tears spilling down her dirt-streaked face. "She's still down there." Stanton felt her pulse slam against her ribs. Alive. After 24 years. Impossible. But the woman wasn't finished. With one last trembling breath, she whispered, "She's the one who told me to run." Stanton staggered back, blood roaring in her ears. Ross grabbed her arm. "Aria, what does that mean?" But Stanton already knew. It meant the keeper wasn't hiding victims. He was keeping them. All of them. It meant the tunnels were not just graves. They were prisons. And it meant one truth more terrifying than anything they had learned. If Mara Ellison was still alive, then she wasn't just a victim. She was surviving something unspeakable. Something still unfolding in the dark. Something screaming for them to find her. The woman's final words, "She's the one who told me to run," ripped through the command room like a lightning bolt, slicing clean through the spine of everything they thought they knew. Officers stare at one another in stunned silence. Radios crackle uselessly. The world beyond the precinct windows dissolves into a cinematic blur of sirens, shadows, and a town holding its breath. Detective Aria Stanton stands motionless, her pulse pounding like a drum buried deep inside her skull. Mara Ellison. Alive. 24 years vanished into darkness, only to send a message through a woman who should have died decades ago. A message Stanton cannot ignore. She kneels before the trembling survivor, no name yet, no record, no identity beyond the one truth she carried with her out of hell. Stanton's voice is steady but cracked at the edges. "Where is she? Where did you last see her?" The woman flinches at the question, shrinking under the harsh fluorescent lights. I don't know, she didn't stay long. She never stayed long. He never let her." "Who?" Stanton pushes gently. "The keeper." But the woman shakes her head weakly. "No, not him, not always him, sometimes the others, sometimes she hid from them too." Stanton feels cold breath seep into her lungs. There were others. Successors. Witnesses. Apprentices. Ones who learned. Ones who helped. Ones who kept the darkness alive when the keeper was absent. Stanton lifts the woman's chin. "Tell me the last thing Mara said to you." The woman's lips tremble. Her eyes fill with a pain so ancient it feels carved into stone. "She said, when they come looking, run toward the noise." Stanton swallows. "Noise?" The woman nods. "Voices. Movement. Light. Anything alive." She said it meant help was close. Ross steps forward, voice low. Then she knew someone would eventually find that tunnel. The woman's breath quickens. "She listens for you. Every day. She said she would know the moment you were close." Stanton's pulse spikes. Did she tell you why she helped you escape instead of going herself? The woman lowers her head. Her whisper is barely audible. She said the keeper likes her too much to ever let her go. A tremor rolls through the room. Officers look away, unable to hold the weight of the truth. Stanton exhales slowly, fighting the rising heat of nausea. Then the woman clutches Stanton's wrist with surprising strength. She said something else. She said, "Tell them I'm not the only one he kept." Stanton's blood turns cold. "How many?" she whispers. The woman's eyes widen with terror, tears spilling freely. "I don't know. I don't know their names. Sometimes I heard voices. Sometimes crying. Sometimes nothing." She shudders violently. "Sometimes he talked to them." Ross steadies her by the shoulders. "Is he still down there?" The woman lets out a fractured laugh. "He's always down there." Her body collapses forward, consciousness slipping away like sand between fingers. Paramedics rush her from the room. Stanton stands slowly. Every muscle in her body feels wired, live, trembling with urgency. The truth is now unmistakable: Mara Ellison might be alive. Other victims too. And the keeper, if he even can be called one man anymore, still moves freely through the labyrinth beneath Cobalt Ridge. Ross speaks first. "We need federal reinforcements." Stanton shakes her head. "No. We need to go now. Aria, we don't have a plan. We don't have time." Ross hesitates, but only briefly. He knows she's right. Every second they delay might be the last second Mara Ellison has. Or the last second before the keeper retreats deeper into the earth, dragging whatever truth remains back into a darkness no search team could ever reach again. Stanton turns to the command room. "Gear up. Full tactical. We re-enter the tunnels immediately." A ripple of fear. Of resolve. Officers rise, donning armor and helmets and heavy lights and weapons. The air vibrates with adrenaline, thick enough to taste. But before Stanton can leave the room, a voice stops her cold. "Detective Stanton." "Caleb." Still chained to the interrogation table, staring through the window into the hallway. His expression carries a strange mixture of terror and something else, anticipation. "You're going back down there," he says quietly. Stanton doesn't respond. "You think you're ready," he murmurs. "You're not." She steps into the room. "Then help me. Tell me where she is." Caleb shakes his head. "Even if I wanted to, I can't. The tunnels change. They always changed. He changed them." Stanton's jaw tightens. "They are not alive, Caleb." He looks up slowly, eyes hollow. "He makes them alive." Before she can speak, he leans forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "He'll take her deeper now. Because he knows you're coming." "Where?" Stanton snaps. "Which direction?" Caleb's lips tremble. "Down." Stanton lifts a brow. "Down where?" "The basin. The old runoff chambers. The collapsed section." "No," Caleb says, eyes widening with something close to reverence. "Further. Past the chambers. Past the drains. Past the stone." He inhales shakily. "Where the air stops moving." Stanton freezes. Ross enters behind her, restless. "Detective, we need to move." Stanton turns to leave. Caleb calls out one last time. "Aria." She pauses. "He won't hurt you yet." She turns back slowly. "Why not?" A small, chilling smile touches Caleb's lips. "Because he hasn't chosen you." Stanton leaves the room without another word, heart hammering in her chest. Outside, the tactical convoy rolls toward the drainage tunnel. Sirens muted. Lights off. Engines low. The town watches from behind locked doors, faces pressed to windows, trembling under the weight of a truth too large to comprehend. Stanton stands at the tunnel entrance once more, rainwater still dripping from the storm, forming rivulets that snake into the dark beneath the earth. She grips her flashlight tighter. Ross closes in beside her. We go as deep as we have to go. Stanton nods. And we don't stop until we find them. They descend. The tunnel swallows them whole. This time, the air feels different, colder, heavier. The silence seems to press against the skin, whispering, tightening, waiting. Shadows cling to the walls like living things. Their lights flicker more often, the deeper they go. After 40 minutes of slow movement, Ross's radio sputters again. Static bursts. Fragmented words. Turn back. The same voice from before. But now Stanton knows for certain. It isn't the keeper's voice. It's a woman's. Weak. Distant. Mara. Keep going, Stanton orders. She's guiding us. They push deeper. Past the chamber of bones. Past the wooden chair. Past the wall of photographs, where the empty slot waits like a prophecy. Stanton doesn't let the team pause. The tunnels narrow. Then widen again. Then split into two paths. Left or right. Both exhale cold air. Both smell of damp earth and rust and something rotting far beyond reach. The radio crackles. Left. Stanton jerks her head. Left. They move. 20 yards in, the floor dips sharply. Officers slide, catching themselves on jagged stone. And then, from the darkness ahead, a sound they've never heard in these tunnels before. A human voice. Faint. Ragged. Whispering. Help. Stanton's breath catches. She sprints toward the sound, Ross on her heels. The tunnel bends sharply, and Stanton's light sweeps across a narrow crack in the stone, just wide enough for a person to slip through. Ross examines it. We can widen it. Do it. Officers wedge metal tools into the crack, forcing the stone apart inch by inch. The rock groans under pressure. Dust rains from above. And behind the crack, something moves. A hand. Small. Pale. Trembling violently. Stanton drops to her knees. Mara? Mara, listen. A voice answers. Fragile. Hoarse. Here. Her heart nearly caves in. Mara, we're coming, Stanton says, voice shaking. Hold on. The officers pry the gap wider. A shoulder appears. Then hair. Then the outline of a face long thought dead, gaunt and hollow and impossibly alive. Mara, listen. 24 years older. 24 years lost in the dark. She collapses into Stanton's arms as officers pull her free. Her body shakes with a mixture of sobs and terror. Ross radios, voice cracking, we have her. Alive, we have her. The tunnel erupts in frantic movement. But Mara's trembling hand grips Stanton's collar with sudden intensity. Her voice breaks into a desperate whisper. You shouldn't have come. Stanton's heart stutters. Why? Mara's eyes widen with terror as she stares into the darkness behind Stanton. His coming. Ross raises his weapon. Who? Mara's voice fractures. The keeper. Stanton stands slowly, drawing her weapon, sweeping her light across the dark. Nothing moves. Then a low sound vibrates through the stone. Not footsteps. Breathing. Deep. Steady. Growing closer. Mara clutches Stanton's arm, trembling violently. He told me, she chokes out. He told me you would come. Stanton lifts her weapon higher. Why? Why now? Mara's answer freezes her blood solid. He didn't want me anymore. Ross swears under his breath. Jesus. Mara's eyes fill with horror. He wanted you. Before Stanton can react, a gust of cold air sweeps through the tunnel, extinguishing half their lights with a single breath. The darkness thickens. Then, from somewhere beyond the edge of their remaining beams, a voice slides through the stone. Calm, resonant, ancient. Welcome, Arya. Stanton's breath trembles. The keeper knows her name. And he is close. Too close. The sound of the keeper's voice, welcome, Arya, hit the tunnel like a shockwave. Officers froze mid-step, weapons trembling in their hands. The radios went dead in unison, as if the darkness had swallowed the frequency itself. Mara Ellison clung to Detective Arya Stanton's arm with desperate strength, her breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. Ross whispered, "How does he know your name?" Stanton didn't answer. Her voice was trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat, locked behind a terror she refused to show. She raised her weapon, sweeping her flashlight across the tunnel. Nothing but stone and shadow. But the air, God, the air, it felt like it was moving around them, pulsing, thickening, tightening, as though the darkness itself were closing fingers around the team. Another breath echoed through the tunnel. Deeper this time. Closer. Mara whimpered. He always comes when the lights go out. Half the lights flickered again, fading to dying embers before flaring back to life. Officers shouted, stumbling backward. Stanton grabbed Mara tighter. Move, she ordered. Fall back to the extraction point. Now. They began to retreat, pulling Mara along, weapons aimed at the dark. But the tunnel felt narrower than before. The walls seemed to pulse, as if reacting to the keeper's presence. Every step echoed too loudly. Every breath felt stolen from the air. Ross stayed close. We can bottleneck him at the bend. If he's human, we... He's not, Mara whispered. Ross stared at her. What do you mean he's not? Mara shook her head violently. He's not like them. Not like the others. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't breathe like you do. He doesn't move like you do. Stanton's grip tightened. Mara, look at me. Is he armed? Mara's eyes widened. He doesn't need to be. Behind them, a soft scrape echoed, a footstep or something dragged lightly across stone. Officers whirled around, lights trembling. The scrape came again, closer. A dragging rhythm, slow, deliberate. The sound of someone who wanted them to know he was coming. Ross swallowed hard. Detective. I hear it, Stanton said. The tunnel tightened into a choke point, just wide enough for two officers to stand shoulder to shoulder. They formed a defensive block, weapons raised, breathing sharp and fast. Lights, Stanton whispered. Every officer aimed their beams into the darkness ahead. The beams hit nothing. Just a wall of shadow. A shadow that seemed to breathe. Mara trembled violently. He's here. Then, for the first time, they heard him move. Not footsteps. Not dragging. Something else. Something that didn't match the rhythm of human weight. A soft, swift shift, like fabric brushing stone, like air pushed aside by something tall. Then a whisper curled through the dark. You went deeper. Ross flinched, finger tightening on the trigger. Stanton stepped forward. Show yourself. A beat. Then. Come closer and I will. Officers exchanged terrified looks. No one moved. The keeper laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't manic. It wasn't even overtly threatening. It was disappointed. Disgusted. As though he expected more from them. Stanton pressed Mara gently toward Ross. Get her out. Ross blinked. Arya, no. Absolutely not. Get her out. Mara's eyes filled with terror. No. Don't stay. He likes it when they stay, he takes them when they stay. But Stanton stepped forward anyway. Something in her, a thread pulled too tight, a flame pushed too far, refused to retreat. Arya, Ross whispered. Don't. She didn't look back. He came here for me, Stanton said quietly. So I'm ending this here. Another shift in the dark. I chose you, the keeper whispered. Long before you knew my name. Stanton lifted her chin. Why? A low inhale. You listen, he said. You see patterns. You walk into the dark instead of turning away. You would have been my finest. Better than Evan. Better than Caleb. You understand the quiet. Is that why you kept them alive? Stanton asked. The keeper's voice softened. No. I kept them because the dark needs witnesses. Stanton tightened her grip on her weapon. Where are the others? Silence. Then. Some stayed. Some broke. Some learned. Stanton felt a chill spread through her bones. And Mara? Why her? She fought, he said, almost fondly. And I like the ones who fight. They last longer. Stanton's rage sharpened like a blade. Let me see your face. A pause. You've already seen it. Stanton's breath faltered. When? In every shadow you feared. Lights flickered again. This time, they didn't return. Pitch black swallowed the team. Officers screamed. Weapons fired. Mara cried out. Ross shouted her name. Stanton spun, searching for movement, for breath, for anything. But the dark was absolute, crushing, suffocating. Her flashlight flickered in her hand, fighting for life. A cold whisper brushed her ear. He's behind you. Stanton swung her weapon, firing. A scream behind her. But not his. An officer collapsed, shot in the leg, crying out in agony. Stanton froze. The keeper laughed again. Wrong choice. Her flashlight finally sputtered back to life, and the beam landed on Mara. Mara standing. Mara staring. Mara not moving toward the exit. But toward Stanton. Mara, Stanton whispered. Stay back. Mara's lips trembled. He said if I delivered you he'd let me leave. Stanton's heart cracked. Ross shouted, get her out of the way. But Mara raised her hand. Don't, she whispered. If you touch me, he'll come. Stanton stared at the woman she'd spent 24 years searching for and saw something devastating: shame, terror, desperation, and a fractured loyalty shaped by years of captivity. Mara, Stanton said gently, you're safe with us. No one is safe with him, Mara choked out. He lives in the places you can't see. He hears what you don't say. He stands where your shadow should be. Stanton stepped forward. Mara stepped back. And from behind Mara, from a fold of darkness so deep it looked like the tunnel itself, came a hand. Long. Pale. Silent. It rested on Mara's shoulder. A hand that didn't belong to any human living above ground. Stanton raised her weapon. Let her go. The keeper spoke softly behind Mara, his voice now inches away. She chose to stay. No, Stanton growled. You forced her. She survived because of me, he answered. She broke because of you. Stanton's breath faltered. Take me instead. Ross shouted, Aria, no. But the keeper responded instantly. Gladly. Then everything happened at once. Mara lunged forward, grabbing Stanton's arm. Run, she whispered. Please, run, he doesn't want me anymore. The keeper's voice thundered through the stone. She's mine. Officers fired blindly toward the sound. A roar of movement followed, swift, unnatural, scraping stone. Lights exploded back on. And the keeper was gone. So was Mara. No. Stanton screamed, sprinting into the tunnel after her. Ross grabbed her. Aria, stop, he wants you to follow. But Stanton tore free, sprinting into the dark, heart pounding like war drums. Mara, she screamed. Mara. No answer. Only breathing. Her radio crackled, just once. A whisper. Her name. Aria. She froze. Her flashlight beam quivered across the stone. And there, on the ground, lay a piece of cloth. Mara's sleeve. Freshly torn. Beside it, carved into the stone with impossible precision, was a message. 3 words. Come find us. Ross caught up to her, breathless, terrified. Aria, we have to go. Now. Stanton stared at the message, her pulse a violent storm in her veins. He took her, she whispered. He took her deeper. We can't go deeper. We barely came out alive. Aria, listen to me. But Stanton looked back into the tunnel, the black throat of the earth, and something inside her shifted. Hardened. Broke. Reformed. She holstered her weapon. We're not done, she said quietly. Ross swallowed. Then what do we tell command? Stanton turned to him, eyes cold as stone. Tell them the truth. Ross hesitated. Which part? Stanton stepped out of the tunnel, rain washing dirt from her boots as she whispered. That the case isn't solved. She met his eyes. And the keeper isn't done. Behind them, deep in the darkness, a faint echo drifted up through the stone. A girl's voice. Mara. Calling Stanton's name. Not in terror. Not in pain. But in warning. As the sun rose over Cobalt Ridge, the desert wind carried a final message up from the tunnels below. The keeper wasn't finished. And the cold case that shocked the community had only just begun.